Chapter 1098. Tao Xinren asked, Xinren Zhang, what is your sex plan for coming down? In the psychic jade wall, Zhang Yan looked at the three of them and said, we need to find a way to rebuild the South Sea formation board. Li Xiaomi said solemnly, the three of us have been trying our best to recover our mana over the years. We can go to the South Sea again once your sect gives us the order. Tao Xinren said in a deep voice, then we must break the formation board first, or we won't be able to do it. Li Xiaomi sighed, that Wu Ruyang has been building the formation for more than 40 years. The Fengling Ocean formation board is already very stable. He did not hesitate to use his mana to guard it. It will not be easy to take it down. Zhang Yan also knew that it would not be easy. He turned around and asked, Tao Xinren, I heard that you used a blade aura to break the formation that Zhou Ruiying and Wu Yunbi were guarding. Tao Xinren nodded, if I can condense Tai circular blade aura, I can give it a try. However, it is not easy to condense such blade aura. Not only does it need a lot of precious materials, but it also needs to borrow qi from the formation. After releasing it, it will take a day before it can be condensed. This process cannot be stopped, or all the previous efforts will be wasted. To break the Fengling Ocean formation board, at least 3 blade auras are needed. However, Wu Ruyang will not give us this opportunity. I'm afraid we need to think of another way. Li Xiaomi pondered, I have a plan. Why don't we go around the Fengling Ocean and set up another formation board in the east of the South Cliff continent? Tao Xinren shook his head, that way, we will be sandwiched between the Fengling Ocean and Donghua. Moreover, the place that can threaten Donghua continent is no longer a matter of Yuxiao. It is very likely that Taihao, Nanhua, and other sects will also find an excuse to go south to cut off our retreat. Li Xiaomi smiled, I don't mean to really set up the formation board there, but to pretend to set it up. Tao Xinren unconsciously said, this plan may work. Li Xiaomi said, the three of us are no match for Yuxiao's combined strength, so there's no harm in splitting up this time. Make it look like we're setting up a formation here to make Yuxiao think that we're really going to launch an attack from here and attract his attention. At the same time, send someone else to the depths of the South Sea and try to set up another formation plate there. Even if it doesn't work, we'll still be able to consume a lot of precious materials. The southern cliff was surrounded by the sea on 3 sides and the continent was huge. It was difficult to set up defenses everywhere. He was sure that with such a posture, even if Yuxiao knew it was fake, he would still be on guard. As for why they did not go to the Southwest Sea, it was because the further west they went, the less spiritium there was. It was not beneficial for them to establish a foothold. He looked up at the jade disc and said, what do you think, Xinren Zhang? Zhang Yan said, the way to attack the enemy is to mix feints with reality. This strategy is very good, but if Wu Ruyang's formation plate is not destroyed, it will be difficult to pose a real threat to Yuxiao. It's just a disturbance, it will be difficult for it to become a threat. However, I already have a plan for this. I have a way to deal with it. The three of you can rest assured and recover your dermic powers here. If you lack external medicine, just write a letter and the Qinsang school will send it over. Not only did the Qinsang school's warehouse not become empty, it was even filled up. The reason was that in the past 40 years, the Shaoqing sect had continuously sent over precious materials and spiritual medicines. There were not many people in the Shaoqing sect. Other than refining the sword pills, they rarely used other things. Moreover, the Middle Pillar continent was extremely rich, so the spiritual items that were sent over every time were innumerable. Zhang Yan said, I'll discuss with the three of you again in 10 days or a month at the latest. After he finished speaking, he bowed. His figure slowly dissipated in the jade disc. The three of them bowed and said, farewell, Xinren Zhang. In the hall of Duzhen, Zhang Yan came out from his meditation and said, I have something to do overseas. If there are guests, tell them that I'm still in seclusion. Jing Yu said, I'll remember that. Zhang Yan left his seat and stood up. With a shake of his sleeve, he left the floating heavenly palace as a beam of clear light and flew in one direction. At this moment, in the North Underworld continent and the South continent, there were already 10 demon kingdoms established at the upper and lower reaches of the two rivers. In each kingdom, there was one of the top 10 disciples of the Qinsang school guarding it. They were searching for treasures and suppressing others. It was the same for the Yuyuan tribe that had already submitted to the Qinsang school. They established a kingdom in the name of the tribe and called it the Yuyuan Kingdom. It guarded under the Two-World Mountain and south of the Jin River. Han Xianying, the disciple of the Han family who ranked last among the top 10 disciples, guarded it. At this moment, Han Xianying wore a lake green dress. Her long hair draped down as she leaned against a chair and flipped through a book in her hand. With the sound of footsteps, a young cultivator hurried over. He said excitedly, "Sister, I didn't think the North Underworld continent would be filled with treasures. Many of the astral sand are inferior to the Donghua continent, but there are many of them. If we take them back, we'll definitely be able to increase the cultivation of our clan's disciples." Han Xianying nodded and said, "Being in charge here, there are many benefits for the clan. The clan elders have already written to me several times to praise me, but I'm afraid that my gains here are still far from those of my senior brothers." The young cultivator did not mind. "So what? There are many spirit treasures and demon cultivators there, but it's nowhere near as comfortable as us here. The disciples don't have to go out and risk their lives either. Sister, you've chosen the right place. According to the rules, other than those that had to be handed over to the clan, the remaining disciples could take 40% of the spiritual herbs and treasures collected here." However, the Yuyuan tribe had been in contact with the Qinsang school for a long time, so the collection of offerings was naturally very smooth. They only needed to send someone down to take a look. The other 9 demon kingdoms were different. The last one, Gaobai Kingdom, had already crossed the Tsang River. There were still many wild demon tribes that refused to be tamed there, so Yan Buxiao personally guarded it with his disciples. It was rumored that there was endless slaughter every day. Han Xianying sighed. "But if I stay elsewhere, I can kill demons and gain more merit from the clan." The young cultivator grinned. "Sister, are you still worried about merit? With your previous contributions, you'll be able to enter the Daylight Hall as an elder after you retire. Even if you take more, it's useless." Han Xianying said faintly, "Without merit, I can't become a grotto heaven. Then what's the point of me entering the third high hall?" The young cultivator was stunned. He scratched his head, not knowing what to say. Han Xianying asked, "Little brother, do you think you're thinking too far ahead?" The young cultivator nodded. Han Xianying said softly, "But which one of my 9 senior brothers isn't thinking the same? Nowadays, the clan's way of doing things is very different from before. There are many secret records and ancient books that can be read. As long as you have a small amount of merit, you can exchange for heavenly and earthly treasures that were hard to find in the past. That's a rare opportunity in the tens of thousands of years since the clan was founded. If you miss it, you won't be able to find it again in the future." She was only at the core transformation stage now. Her lifespan was only 600 years. As one of the top 10 disciples, it was not difficult for her to enter the Yuanying stage, but that was only 1,000 years. However, if she cultivated to the Grotto Heaven stage, she would at least have a lifespan of 3,000 years. Just this alone was worth pursuing. However, when she said that, she looked at her little brother's indifferent face as if it had nothing to do with them. She subconsciously touched her forehead and sighed. "Forget it, little brother, you won't understand." As she spoke, she suddenly felt the ground beneath her tremble slightly. It seemed like the entire pavilion was also shaking. She was surprised at first, but her expression changed immediately. She threw the book aside and stood up to look out of the pavilion. She saw a grand clear light coming from the south in the sky. It went straight to the north. Because that streak of light was too fast, it seemed to have connected the ground into 2 parts. It looked as if it had cut through the sky in one breath. The momentum was astonishing. The young cultivator said in shock, "Sister, that is..." Han Xianying thought for a while and her beautiful eyes lit up. If I'm not wrong, that should be the Taoist grotto heaven from our Qinsang school traveling. I wonder if he's going to start a war with the demonic cultivators again. The young cultivator's eyes widened. He then looked around and said, is it Taoist Lu from the last time? Han Xianying frowned and thought about it. She shook her head and said, how can I tell which Taoist master is here? However, when Taoist Lu traveled, he was accompanied by golden water. This person's qi is clear and bright like a sword, so it shouldn't be him. Zhang Yan flew all the way to the north. Along the way, he alarmed many Qinsang school disciples and demonic cultivators. However, he was already able to restrain his mana and qi well. Therefore, his mana only surged where he passed and didn't alarm his peers outside the continent. Very quickly, he crossed the Tsang River and arrived at the North Underworld continent. Not long after, he could see the Lord of the Universe Palace standing on the snowy peak from afar. At this moment, the other side seemed to have sensed his arrival as the forbidden formations below were activated. The light shot up to the sky. The four qi were restrained like a bundle as if they were facing a great enemy. He only glanced over and didn't stay for long. He continued to fly to the north. At this moment, in the palace, the four demon marquises were all there. A few pairs of eyes watched as he went further away. Only then did they let down their guard. Chu Yu said with a solemn expression, it's Qinsang School Hall Master Du Jin Zhang Yan. His mana is much stronger than when I first met him on the sea. Yan Huiguang heaved a sigh of relief. He said with lingering fear, what is this person doing here? Luo Mengzi muttered, I don't know yet, but I don't think he's here for me. Qinsang School has an agreement with me, so there's no need to start a war with us now. He's probably here for other matters. Li Fu looked a little dispirited. He stood up and said, since there's nothing else, I'll go back to cultivate. Please forgive me. Just now, he was still recovering his mana in the cave abode. He was disturbed by Zhang Yan's qi dynamic, so he had to stop cultivating and come out to deal with it with the three of them. Now that he realized it was just a false alarm, he didn't want to stay any longer. After bidding farewell, he hurried back to cultivate. Yan Huiguang said, what does Marquis Luo think Shinren Zhang came here for? Luo Mengzi shook his head, there's no need to make wild guesses. So what if you know? It'll just cause trouble for you. At this moment, Zhang Yan had already leaped over the North Underworld continent and reached the northernmost ocean. There were floating icebergs everywhere, and it was a vast expanse of whiteness. Other than the sound of the surging seawater and the collision of the ice and land, there were no signs of living beings. It was extremely cold and desolate. Since Wu Ruyang used the insects of the South Cliff continent to deal with the formation plate, he might as well use another type of strange species to break the formation. There were countless strange species in the world above the North Sea. For example, the black tortoise that carried the 9 cities was caught by the great underworld patriarch from here. He had seen many secret records and knew that in this sea region, there was a 3-headed abyss toad. Once this creature fought with others, its body would become incomparably large. It was rumored that it could swallow continents, but normally, it was only the size of a fist. If he could find it and move it to the South Sea, as long as he used it well, it wouldn't be difficult to break the formation plate. He scanned the surroundings with his divine will and sensed that there were 2 strange species that were at least 10,000 years old under the sea. However, there was not enough spiritual vigor in this world, so they were both in a deep sleep. This was to reduce the consumption of their vitality, but based on the situation, they would probably not wake up until the end of their lives. These 2 strange species were only of the water clan, so they were not the target of this trip. Hence, he went deeper into the North Sea. He wandered in this sea for more than 10 days and found more than 10 strange species. All of them were in a deep sleep, but the abyss toad was not among them. After another 3 to 4 days, he came to a dark sea. His expression changed, and he thought, the place where the abyss toad lives according to the ancient books is very similar to this place. He stood silently in the air and sensed for a long time. Suddenly, a ray of light flashed in his eyes. This time, he found something. He stretched out his hand and a clear chi went into the sea. After more than 10 breaths, he brought up a snow-white toad that looked like it was carved out of beautiful jade. He recognized that this was the hard shell of the abyss toad. He was excited, knowing that he did not find the wrong place. He clenched his fist and crushed it. After looking down a few more times, he gently waved his sleeves, and the seawater below split into 2 sides. He then went down. Not long after, he saw a huge pile of stones at the bottom. It was all piled up by the shell of the abyss toad. At the top, there was a gray round stone. Its surface was full of potholes, and it was extremely ugly. His gaze focused on it, and with a thought, the item flew up from the pile of rocks and fell into his hand. Carefully sensing it, he could sense that there was a strand of weak vitality within it, but it wasn't far from truly dying. At most, it would be able to hold on for another 100 or 200 years. Even if it was awakened, it might not be of much use. After thinking for a moment, he put it away first. He looked around, and finally, he jumped up and went to other places to search. He wandered around this place for more than a month and found the remaining 2 abyss toads. However, one of them had half of its shell cracked, and its interior was empty. He did not know where it had gone. The other abyss toad was in a slightly better condition than the first one he found. When it sensed that it had fallen into his hands, it even took the initiative to submit to him. Zhang Yan smiled. Although the abyss toad had a strong body, it was afraid of the strong and bullied the weak. It was used to sailing with the wind. When they saw someone stronger than them, they would immediately become docile, not daring to disobey. However, when it came to the weak, they would willfully bully and humiliate them. In ancient times, they were often ordered around by cultivators, and from the looks of it, this was indeed the case. He put this abyss toad into his bag and did not stay any longer. He turned around and returned to Chinsung School. On the way back, he put the comb hair mutant in his sleeve. A few days later, he returned to the floating heavenly palace. Just as he was about to go to the Duzhen Hall, a boy came up and stopped him. He said, "Hall Master Duzhen, please wait. Sect leader spiritual master wants to see you." Zhang Yan said that he understood and went to the main hall. After entering the hall, he greeted the sect leader and sat down. He asked, "Sect leader spiritual master, do you have any instructions for me?" Sect leader Qin said, "Hall Master Duzhen should know about the internal strife in the sect." Zhang Yan was surprised. He did not know why sect leader Qin suddenly mentioned this. He nodded and said, "I know a little." Sect leader Qin said slowly, "During the internal strife, my brothers and I either left or were imprisoned. I want Hall Master Duzhen to see the person who was imprisoned in the small cold world. I want to ask him if he has let go of the things that happened in the past." Chapter 1099. After Zhang Yan came out of the main hall, he saw Shen Baishuang standing outside with his back to his house. He raised his eyebrows and said, "Jinren Shen." Shen Baishuang turned around and said in a deep voice, "Sect leader Shixiang ordered me to go with you." Zhang Yan nodded. He sensed that this trip might not be so simple. Shen Baishuang seemed to want to say something, but after taking a look at the main hall, he jumped up and said, "Let's talk while we walk." Zhang Yan nodded in agreement, then he rode the wind and flew out of the hall. With their abilities, it would only take a moment to reach the small cold world, but at this time, they deliberately slowed down their traveling speed. After getting off the floating sky, Shen Baishuang asked, "How much do you know about what happened in the past?" Zhang Yan shook his head. After he took the position of Duzhen Hall Master, he never deliberately inquired about the past of the sect. First, these things had nothing to do with cultivation, so he was not interested to know. Second, it might be related to what sect leader Qin did in the past. As a senior, it was better to know less, so he did not know much about the person who was imprisoned in the small cold world. Shen Baishuang looked into the distance and said, "After Uncle Qin ascended, the sect gradually became chaotic. At this time, Master ordered me to go out to find opportunities. When I was traveling, I followed Master's instructions and did not inquire about the sect. It was not until later when I returned to the mountain that I learned the details from Master and Senior Sister Qin. Zhang Yan just listened and did not interrupt. Shen Baishuang continued, among Uncle Qin's disciples, there were two who were extremely outstanding. They were senior brother Yan Changsheng and senior brother Li Gezhang. These two overshadowed all the other disciples of the same generation, and their age difference was not big. At that time, they all thought that the next sect leader would be chosen from these two, but in the end, it was fate that made a fool out of them. Speaking of this, he sighed. At that time, he was still young and admired the two. He did not expect that the two would fight for the position of the sect leader, and end up with one breaking out of the door and the other being reincarnated. After a moment of silence, he continued, however, Martial Uncle Qin's other disciples are not to be trifled with. Let's not talk about senior brother sect leader, there's also the one imprisoned in the little cold realm. His innate talent is also outstanding, which is why he is in the same sect as senior brother Yan and senior brother Li. If he was in another sect, he would be a top talent. At this time, Zhang Yan asked, may I know your name? Shen Baishuang said, his name is Mu Shoushan. If it wasn't for the fact that the path he took was very unusual, no one knows what kind of trouble he would have caused in the sect. Senior brother Qin wouldn't have worked together with the sect to imprison him. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised and said, could it be that this person is also interested in the position of sect master? Shen Baishuang seemed to have thought of something, his expression somewhat strange. He said, there is indeed such a reason. Originally, this person had a lazy personality and seemed to have no interest in anything other than cultivation. However, who would have thought that this person's fighting ability is not inferior to that of the two senior brothers? In some aspects, he is even better than them. When Zhang Yan heard this, he could not help but be a little surprised. He had really fought with Yan Changsheng and knew his ability very well. Although he had never seen Li Gezhang, Jinren Li was not weak. However, the two of them could be compared, so he was not weak. However, this person was actually not weaker than the two of them in Shen Baishuang's evaluation. In fact, he even surpassed them. It seemed that he was not an ordinary person. He thought for a while and asked, may I know which cultivation technique this person cultivates? Not just one. Shen Baishuang took a deep breath and said, he cultivates 3 at the same time. Zhang Yan could not help but reveal a surprised expression. He said, 3 at the same time. In Qinsang school, those who cultivated the 5 skills usually only focused on one cultivation technique. However, there was no lack of people who cultivated 2 at the same time. However, to do so, they needed to cultivate at the same time from the beginning. The effort required was much more than that of their peers. However, if they succeeded, they would indeed have many more methods. They would even be able to learn one more of the 12 divine abilities. That would be a great advantage in a fight of magical powers. However, if one of the 2 cultivation techniques could not keep up, then they would definitely be blocked at a certain realm. For example, Zhong Muqing was like this. If he had been cultivating under Meng Zhen, his future achievements would have been considerable. However, halfway through, he switched to Qin Yu to cultivate, so he was delayed for a lot of time. He even achieved Yuanying much later than Huxian. As a result, he had to invest more time and energy for every step forward. Although it was not that no one had tried to cultivate 3 skills at the same time, it was only for those who wanted to improve their fighting ability and cultivate more divine abilities. They themselves knew that after stepping on this path, unless they completely abandoned their cultivation and started from scratch, most of them would have no hope of reaching the Great Tao. They did not expect that someone would really enter the heavenly abode using this method. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment and said, how did this Jinren do it? Did he rely on some external object? Shen Baishuang said, you are very accurate. When Mu Shixiang was cultivating in his early years, he accidentally entered a small world in the sect. That was the only small world left behind by the 2nd-generation sect master. Mu Shixiang obtained a strange object from inside, called the Pool of Creation. This object was originally left to the 2nd-generation sect master by the great underworld patriarch before he left. It was said that he relied on this treasure to do what ordinary people could not do. Zhang Yan nodded and said, if that's the case, then it makes sense. Shen Baishuang said, if Mu Shixiang's path was smooth, it could be considered as opening up a path for the future generations. Unfortunately, an accident occurred in the end, and in the end, he was divided into two souls. One was arrogant and overbearing, and could not tolerate the slightest bit of disobedience, and would fall out with others at the slightest provocation. The other person's temperament was not much different from senior brother's original personality. Most of the time, the latter was in control of the body, and it had always been safe. However, it just so happened that after the two senior brothers were gone, he also jumped out and said that he wanted to seize the position of sect master. Because he always acted without fear, the sect master joined forces and imprisoned him in the small cold world. Zhang Yan said, so that's what happened. Shen Baishuang said, the Qin clan has been painstakingly looking for that treasure for tens of thousands of years, but it was always difficult to find it. Later on, when they found out that it fell into senior brother Mu's hands, they wanted to exchange it with other things, but senior brother Mu was unwilling. Now that I think about it, if he had taken it out at that time, then perhaps there wouldn't have been so many problems in the future. As they spoke, the two of them had already arrived in front of the parting peak of the great pool of Dragon Lake. Because the news had been spread beforehand, there was already a pale Yuanying elder waiting here. When he saw Zhang and Shen arrive, he hurriedly took a few steps forward, stood on the cave cliff, and bowed deeply, saying, Yuan Tong greets the two masters. There was a look of reverence on his face. There were more than 10 abodes in the sect, and because they usually cultivated in their own abodes, it was usually difficult for the cultivators in the sect to meet even one of them. They never thought that they would meet two at once this time. Zhang Yan looked at him a few times, and said, so that elder Yuan who guards this place is, who are you? Yuan Tong said, that's my master. Zhang Yan nodded, and said, so elder Yuan took in a disciple later on. He looked at Yuan Tong for a few times, and saw that this Yuan Tong's talent was average, but he was able to cultivate to the Yuanying level. It must have something to do with him guarding the little cold world, so he reached out his hand and pointed. Yuan Tong only felt his body tremble. However, there were wisps of white smoke coming out from the top of his head. It looked extremely cold, and there was even a thin layer of frost on his hair. He circulated his energy and felt his whole body warm up. It was extremely comfortable, as if he had drunk a bowl of mellow wine. His complexion even became a little rosier. He had been cultivating in the little cold world for a long time, and the cold air had invaded his lungs, so he had to drink some Huanyang wine from time to time to resist it. But even so, there was still the accumulation of cold poison. Although it was not certain that he would be ill. However, when he cultivated, he had to split his attention to suppress it. Furthermore, the longer he cultivated, the more troublesome it would be. However, at this moment, he felt that all the poisonous gas had disappeared without a trace under that finger, and he could not feel it anymore. After a few breaths, he finally recovered from his surprise, and deeply bowed to Zhang Yan. He was filled with gratitude, and said, thank you, Jinren, for helping me to expel the cold air. Zhang Yan nodded, and said, back then, Elder Yuan and I were considered to be friends, so consider it as me taking care of his disciples. Open the realm gate, Jinren Shen and I need to enter. Yuan Tong said, yes, I will open the realm gate now. He turned around and clapped his hands 3 times. He heard a muffled sound coming from inside, and then a gust of cold wind blew out. He instinctively moved a step to the side, and before he could turn around to greet them, he saw 2 rays of clear light entering the realm gate. He stared blankly for a while, and did not even close the door, and sat down by the door. He took out a pot of wine, and a small cup. He faced the world of ice and snow inside, and slowly drank. After Zhang and Shen entered the small world, in order to prevent their magic power from shaking the mountains and rivers below, they leaped up to a very high place and flew north. In less than a quarter of an hour, they arrived in front of a large formation. Zhang Yan came here a few hundred years ago, and at that time, he was at the level of core formation. When he felt the power of the big formation, he retreated far away, and did not dare to get close. Looking at it now, he saw 4 altars below, and outside, there were 16 big pillars and 4,000 small pillars. They were arranged into a formation, and there was a faint glow above. Gusts of wind were howling, and clouds of black smoke and devilish aura were circling in the air. Shen Baishuang said, "That is the source of the 9 underworlds' cold wind that is wreaking havoc in this realm. It will happen once every 12 hours, so that this place is always cold, and it is convenient to detain the criminals in the sect." Zhang Yan's spirit moved, and a talisman floated out from his sleeve, and floated in front of him. This was the talisman given by sect leader Qin, and it could be used to enter the big formation. He raised his hand, and just as he was about to open the formation door, his movement paused slightly, and he looked in the direction of the realm door. Shen Baishuang also noticed it, and he said in a deep voice, "It is senior sister Qin outside. She must be worried about senior brother Mu, but it is not a problem. Without sect leader senior brother's order, she would not dare to enter." Zhang Yan retracted his gaze, and stretched out his finger to touch the talisman. A ray of light was emitted from the talisman, and it shone below, and immediately, a formation I was cut open above the formation Qi. He rolled up his sleeve, and kept the talisman, and said, "Jinren Shen, follow me inside." After saying this, he turned into a ray of light and descended. Shen Baishuang also jumped down. After passing through the formation door, they realized that it was a pitch-black tunnel made of smoke. After walking for an unknown amount of time, a spot of light appeared in front of them, and they knew that they had reached the exit. The 2 of them extended their flying lights and passed through. When they reached the outside, Zhang Yan's gaze swept across, and he saw that the sky was high and the ground was wide. There were no clouds in the sky for thousands of miles, and the place was green and unusually clear. Below them was a calm lake, without any ripples, and the light was like a mirror. In the distance, there were 2 mountains shaped like sharp awls, and they were covered with pure white snow. His expression changed slightly, and he said, "This is not the little cold world." Shen Baishuang's expression was also a little strange. He looked around, and lowered his head to think, and said, "I have been to many small and medium-sized worlds in Qinsang School, but I have never been to this place, and I have never heard of it. So, this is most likely the small world that the 2nd-generation sect leader left behind." Zhang Yan also nodded. Almost all the small and medium-sized worlds were recorded in the Hall of Duzhen, but there was no record of this place. It was obvious that either the identity of the founder was special, and he did not want outsiders to disturb him, or the sect deliberately concealed it. Shen Baishuang thought to himself, "I thought that senior brother sect leader imprisoned senior brother Mu here, and he must have suffered for hundreds of years, but I didn't expect it to be like this. Senior brother must have done this to hide it from the eyes and ears of the aristocratic families." After sensing with his heart for a moment, Zhang Yan sensed a wisp of obscure qi activity in the mountain, and he looked over, and said, "Jinren Mu should be there." With a thought, his body turned into a ray of light, and in just a few breaths, he arrived in front of the mountain. He saw that the back of the mountain peak had a platform made with manna, and on top of it, there was a fine house, so he descended and landed outside. Shen Baishuang also arrived at this moment, and after he landed, he raised his voice and said, "Is senior brother Mu here?" After a short while, the curtains of the house were lifted, and a well-groomed, gentle, and elegant white-robed scholar came out. He looked to be in his 30s, but there was a hint of laziness in his expression. He revealed a surprised expression and said, "Junior brother Shen." He then looked at Zhang Yan, and there was a hint of vigilance in his expression, and he said, "How should I address you, Jinren?" Shen Baishuang said in a deep voice, "This is the current hall master of the Duzhen Hall, Zhang Yan, Jinren Zhang." Mu Shoushan was instantly filled with respect. He knew that every person who could become a hall master of the 3 halls had either made great contributions to the sect, or they had extraordinary strength, or else they would not be able to suppress the people of the same generation in the sect. Thus, he raised his hand and solemnly bowed, and said, "Greetings, hall master of the Duzhen Hall." Zhang Yan also returned the greeting, and said, "Jinren Mu, greetings." Mu Shoushan waved his hand, and said, a sinner doesn't deserve Hall Master Duzhen's greeting. It must be my junior brother's idea for the two of you to come here. Do you have anything to say? Zhang Yan looked at him, and said, the sect master specially asked me to ask you, Jinren Mu, have you let go of your past thoughts? Mu Shoshan smiled, and there was a hint of laziness in his eyes, and he said, so what if I can let go? So what if I can't? Hall Master Duzhen, you can go and tell the sect master that I'm living well here, and I don't want to leave. After saying that, he wanted to return to the fine house, but he realized that Zhang Yan did not move at all, and he said in surprise, why aren't you leaving, Hall Master Duzhen? Zhang Yan said plainly, I still want to ask for the opinion of the other person. Mu Shoshan was stunned, and he frowned, and said in a warning tone, this person is violent, and doesn't follow the rules. He also likes to fight with others. It's not easy for you to cultivate to this stage, so why must you meet him? If you're hurt, it'll be the Qinsung school's loss. Zhang Yan seemed to be interested, and he said, is that person really like that? Mu Shoshan said seriously, I'm not exaggerating at all. It's better for Hall Master Duzhen and junior brother Shen to leave as soon as possible. It won't be good if anyone gets hurt. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered, and he said, if that's the case, I should meet him even more. Mu Shoshan was surprised, and he said, why is that? Zhang Yan's eyes flickered, and he said, I once fought with Jinren Yan, but unfortunately, he was not at his peak, and I couldn't enjoy myself to the fullest, and I deeply regretted it. Today, my cultivation has improved slightly, and I'm looking everywhere for a suitable opponent. Now that Jinren is here, it'll be my fortune if I can have a match. Chapter 1100. Mu Shoshan's expression slowly turned serious. He stared at Zhang Yan and said in a low voice, did you fight with eldest senior brother before? Shen Baishuang knew that he had been imprisoned for many years and did not know anything that had happened in the sect for hundreds of years. He took a step forward and said, senior brother Yan died after fighting with Hall Master Duzhen. His disciple, Lu Junyang, is now in the sect. A few days ago, he had formed a grotto heaven. Mu Shoshan's expression became complicated. He muttered, that means that senior brother Yan lost this battle. To be able to summon Hall Master Duzhen to fight, it must be the sect master's order. Although he did not care much about the sect, he could guess the reason. After a long time, he suddenly raised his head and asked, who is Hall Master Duzhen's disciple? Is it my junior brother Qin? Zhang Yan said, after I entered the sect, I became the disciple of Danding Institute's Zhou Chengju. Brother Zhou? Mu Shoshan was startled. He nodded and said, with Brother Zhou's talent, he can indeed teach someone like you. Shen Baishuang said, although Hall Master Duzhen is the disciple of Institute Master Zhou, his skills and techniques are mostly from his own cultivation. However, most of his magical abilities and Taoist techniques are from his own cultivation, especially Duzhen Hall Master's pill, which has reached the first grade. Even in our Dark Azure sect's more than 10,000 years of existence, this is still rarely seen. I heard that Zhou Yuanzhu often laments that he, as the master, is at most only half a guide. First grade elixir. When Mu Shoshan heard this, his expression finally changed. The laziness on his face was swept away. He looked over with a burning gaze and said, if that's the case, maybe you can really fight with me. Maybe you can even help me solve the problem. As he spoke, his voice became softer and softer, as if he was talking to himself. Mred type equals, page split number equals 1, / Zhang Yan noticed that the way he addressed Mu Shoshan was a little different, and his heart moved. Shen Baishuang did not make a sound. He could guess that sect leader Qin had sent Zhang Yan here to suppress Mu Shoshan with force. From his point of view, Zhang Yan's mana was strong, and his ability to fight was far better than his peers. Now that he had cultivated to the second level of the Grotto Heaven realm, his supernatural powers were even more extraordinary. Moreover, the small world here had been sealed off all year round, and the spiritual vigor could not be compared to the outside world. This priest brother had been trapped here for a long time, and he was afraid that his skills had long been rusty. Mu Shoushan looked at the sky and said, although there is no sun or moon in this small world, there is day and night. I made a promise with that person that I will only let him go after noon. If you want to see him, it will take some time. Zhang Yan smiled, don't worry, we will wait here. Mu Shoushan said solemnly, you are the Qinsang School Hall Master Du Zhen, and you are not an outsider. Before that, I have something to tell you, so that there will not be unnecessary casualties when a fight breaks out later. Zhang Yan agreed. Although Mu Shoushan was trapped here, he was still a cultivator of the Qinsang school. Moreover, Mu Shoushan had warned him so seriously, so the other party was not weak. If they could tell each other clearly, they could stop in time when there was danger, so they would not hurt each other. Hence, Zhang Yan nodded and agreed. Mu Shoushan shook his sleeve, and in the mist, 3 flat green stones appeared. There was a stone table in the middle, and on it was a warm porcelain teapot. Green leaves floated in the teacups, and in the mist, there was a fragrance. He sat down on a rock and casually summoned a teacup. After taking a sip, he spread out his sleeves and gestured, saying, gentlemen, please. Zhang Yan and Shen Baishuang they greeted each other and went to a green stone. As soon as they sat down, 2 cups of tea flew up from the stone table and landed in front of them. Since the master had invited them, they had to drink. Both of them took a sip, and they felt the fragrance in their mouths. They even felt the mana in their bodies filling up. Shen Baishuang took a look and said, the leaves are normal, but the tea is not normal. It seems to be a high-grade pill water. Even if the school has it, they would have to use herbs to boil it. Zhang Yan commented, the medicinal energy is pure, and there is no impurities. It should not be something that was born in the world, but cultivated. Mu Shoushan praised, as expected of Brother Zhou's disciple, you can tell the source with just 1 sip. I drew this water from the creation pool. If the body drinks it often, it can increase its lifespan. Shen Baishuang said, it's a pity that I did not bring my body with me on this trip. I did not know that the treasure pool had such a use. Mu Shoushan put down the cup and smiled. This item is amazing. Back then, I obtained it from this small world. It was originally given to the 2nd-generation schoolmaster by the great underworld patriarch. At that time, the patriarch had just passed away, and there were only about 10 people in the Qinsang school, including the servants. They were all people with low cultivation. However, the demonic and demonic aura in the world was very calm, and there were many evil species in the North Darkness continent. There were also many people who coveted the spirit cave and wanted to take it for themselves, so I left this treasure behind so that the 2nd-generation schoolmaster could use it to protect the school. Zhang Yan said, so this item came from the great underworld patriarch. However, tens of thousands of years ago, the Qinsang school was still flourishing, and it was blocking the North Darkness continent's demons from heading south. If something went wrong, the school would be in danger of collapsing, so it was no wonder that this was arranged. King Kang red type equals, page split number equals, 3 / most of the elders in the school knew that the 2nd-generation schoolmaster, Chen Luozhou, was a child by the great underworld patriarch's side. The 3rd-generation schoolmaster, Yuan Zhongzi, was the true disciple of the patriarch. However, the 3rd-generation schoolmaster had yet to complete his cultivation, so the patriarch passed on the responsibility of the school to the 2nd-generation schoolmaster. However, the great underworld patriarch was also very capable. When he was in charge of the school, he had gone through countless battles. It could be said that he had blocked countless enemies outside the school with his own strength, and that was how the newly established Qinsang school managed to survive. Shen Baishuang thought about it and said, no wonder the Chen clan wanted to get it back after they found out that it was with you. Mu Shoushan snickered and said, even after I was imprisoned, they did not give up on the idea. If it wasn't for junior brother Qin stopping them and rebuking them with righteousness, they would have gotten it long ago. Shen Baishuang nodded silently. It is rumored that you relied on this treasure to be able to cultivate 3 superior techniques at the same time. Mu Shoushan said honestly, it is rumored that I indeed relied on this treasure to be able to do what even senior brother Li could not do. He calmly picked up the teacup and gracefully took a sip. After putting the teacup down, he continued, I cultivate both the fire and metal techniques at the same time. However, there are two spirits in my body, so I can cultivate one technique at a time. When one person is quiet, the other person will work hard. After cultivating to the core transformation stage, I can cultivate the divine art. The first technique I cultivated was the two images heart. The first step of this technique is to divide the spirit into the inside and the outside. However, I didn't need to do that, so I easily mastered it. However, at that time, I felt something calling me from inside the door, so I followed its guidance and entered this place. Then, I found that thing, red type equals, page split number equals, // there was also the great underworld patriarch Chen's book beside it. This book was very helpful to me. If it wasn't for the secret techniques recorded in it, I wouldn't have been able to use this treasure well. As he said this, a strange light appeared in his eyes. Only then did I know that this great underworld patriarch Chen was like me, a person with two spirits. Shen Baishuang was not surprised, but then he sighed and said, this is fate, no wonder this item ended up in senior brother's hands. Zhang Yan smiled. This kind of matter should be considered a secret. However, this was the second-generation sect master's secret, so he didn't need to know too much about it. He said, since the patriarch left behind this treasure, it's very likely that it's more suitable for people like the second-generation sect master and Mu Jinren. Mu Shoshan said, that's right. The book contains all kinds of profound enlightenment, and I really benefited a lot from it. Later on, I followed the method and placed one spirit in the pool, and the other outside to cultivate. I didn't expect that when I broke through the realm, there would be no obstacles even if the other technique was incomplete. Later on, I cultivated the Yuanying Dharma body. When the Dharma body left, it left behind a body and released the other spirit, allowing it to continue cultivating the remaining technique. Shen Baishuang frowned and said in surprise, even if it's two spirits, it's just a split of the spirit. The blood essence and Yuan Qi in the body are still one. After the Dharma body is moved, it's just a paper house. If there's any movement, it would collapse. How did senior brother cultivate? Mu Shoshan smiled and said, that's a good question. The pool of rebirth is called rebirth, and it can continuously replenish the vitality in the body. This is its real function. Great underworld patriarch Qin used this item to fight with others. As long as the water in the pool is not dried up and the vitality is not extinguished, there is no need to worry about the lack of mana. Red type equals, page split number equals, 5 / it can hold up the mountain gate. Because I don't cultivate any techniques, and with the help of the pool water, the other spirit only took 100 years to reach the middle stage of Yuanying. At that time, I suddenly had an idea. Could I cultivate one or more techniques? I could put my mind and spirit into it. If I could master all 3 techniques, it would be the only one in the world. I might even be able to enter the grotto heaven. I discussed it with him and he agreed with me. Since fire can create earth and earth can create metal, I chose the treasure gold cloud scroll to cultivate. Shen Baishuang could only shake his head when he heard this. A cultivator's cultivation was made with fear and trepidation. Based on his estimation, when Mu Shoshan came up with this idea, he was already close to 700 years old. He did not have much time left, yet he still dared to do such a thing. Shen Baishuang did not know what to say. Mu Shoshan smiled and said, at that time, senior brother Yan and senior brother Li were there. There were also a few other geniuses from the same sect. Master never asked me how I cultivated. Otherwise, I might not have been able to do it. Zhang Yan thought about it and said, if Jinren Mu did not cultivate it, he would not be able to do it now. However, I have a question. Mu Shoshan said, ask away. Zhang Yan looked at him and said, I heard from Jinren Mu that you cultivated a Yuanying. I wonder if after entering the grotto heaven, did you? Mu Shoshan did not wait for him to finish and laughed, that's right. I was born with 2 spirits and cultivated 2 Dharma bodies. After entering the elephant realm, I formed 2 Dharma bodies. Although Shen Baishuang had already guessed it, he was still shocked when he heard it from Mu Shoshan's mouth. He took a deep breath and said, if that's the case, when the Jinren imprisoned senior brother, he was the only one. Mred type equals, page split number equals 6 / did someone show up? Mu Shoshan's expression calmed down and he said, he is him, and I am me. He was the one who wanted to be the Jinren master back then. I have no intention of standing up for him. Zhang Yan thought to himself, the cultivators of our Xian men are not like those of the devil's doctrine. It is almost impossible for us to achieve 2 Dharma forms. There are only records of it in some ancient books. At least, it has not been heard of in the tens of thousands of years since the West continent came east. I think that the lake of creation is the key. Regardless of whether it was the Xian men or the devil's doctrine, a cultivator's primordial essence qi was limited to this. Therefore, even if there was an extra Dharma idol, it wouldn't be much of an advantage. During a battle, it would require a combination of techniques, divine abilities, and even magic treasures. However, Mu Shoshan had the help of treasures. Zhang Yan deduced from his cultivation process that if it was a battle, the 2 Dharma bodies could be treated as 2 people. In addition, they had the secret technique of the second Jinren master. They might even be able to coordinate with each other. Then, their true battle power would be even stronger. Shen Baishuang sighed, the lake of creation is indeed a treasure. Mu Shoshan said calmly, it is indeed a treasure. However, it is also the cause of my success and failure. After entering the grotto heaven, this treasure could no longer help me increase my cultivation. I have to follow the prescribed order, just like when I first started cultivating. I have to level up all 3 techniques at the same time. When I was imprisoned, the 2 Dharma bodies had already entered the second realm. However, after 800 years, not many of them managed to break through. I read Ancestor Chen's handwriting and deduced that only by combining the 2 Dharma bodies and perfecting myself can I cultivate the embryo and enter the third realm. Shen Baishuang said, the second Jinren master also ascended in the end. I think he has a way to solve the problem here. If he can do it, it is not impossible for senior brother to do it. Mred type equals, page split number equals, 7 / good. Mu Shoshan smiled and said casually, if I was the Jinren master back then, I might have a chance. Now that I don't have much time left, let's not think too much about it. Moreover, Ancestor Chen had already abandoned this treasure when he was yuanying. He is very different from me. Shen Baishuang was shocked and looked over. After a while, he said, Senior brother Mu is really daring. Senior brother dares to do something that the second Jinren master has never done. Mu Shoshan smiled and said, why not? If we only dare to walk the path that our seniors have walked and blindly follow, then we are just mediocre people who pursue the Tao. We are not people who seek the Tao. Zhang Yan was very impressed. From now on, no matter what this Jinren Mu was thinking, he still dared to walk on this path even though he knew that the future was difficult. Such courage alone was extraordinary. Zhang Yan picked up the teacup and said, Jinren Mu, you dare to do something that no one has done before. I will use tea in place of wine to toast you. Jinren Mu's eyes brightened. He picked up the teacup with a smile and drank it in one gulp. He said, he is coming out soon. Every time he comes, I am influenced by him. Just now, what I said is not exactly what I meant. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and asked, I don't know what Jinren Mu needs to do to complete his Dharma form. Jinren Mu was about to speak, but he frowned slightly. Fatigue appeared in his eyes as he said, he is coming. Be careful. As soon as he finished speaking, he lay down on the rock, and then there was no more sound. After a while, he slowly sat up again. However, his eyes were no longer gentle and calm like just now. Instead, they were filled with conceit. He stood up and looked back and forth between the 2 of them. He said in a low voice, Qin Mabai sent you 2 here. Mred type equals, page splitter number equals, 8 / alright? Are you willing to let me out? But the sect has already become a mess. Humph, I knew it. Without me, how could he resist the aristocratic families? Without waiting for the 2 of them to reply, he waved his hand and said, let's not worry about this for now. I see that the two of you are quite skilled. Since you're here, fight with me first. If you're satisfied, I will follow you out." As soon as he finished speaking, a rumble was heard. The mountain peak was filled with golden light. Chapter 11:01. As early as the moment before the golden light appeared, Zhang Yan and Shen Baishuang had both used the lesser teleportation escape technique to escape. When they stopped, the two of them had already appeared thousands of miles away. Zhang Yan said, "Jinren Shen, you can wait outside. I'll deal with Jinren Mu." Shen Baishuang knew that he could handle it, so he did not say much. He only reminded him, "Hall Master Du Zhen, be careful. I've checked it just now. This small world is sealed by a formation, so it won't collapse. The formation outside is connected to the mountain gate, so you don't have to worry about anything." As soon as he finished, he turned into a ray of light and headed to the small world's entrance. At this moment, he saw a golden rainbow chasing from afar, and he heard a shout coming from afar, "Junior Marshal Brother Shen, you are so rude. How dare you leave without my permission?" Shen Baishuang did not reply. He opened his hand, and the shadow of a mountain appeared behind him. White clouds surrounded the mountain and pushed the golden light away. He turned around and went out of the small world's entrance. When the golden light saw that it couldn't stop him and was also blocked by the restrictive formation, it turned around and flew towards Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan could see clearly that it was a four-edged octagonal golden stone that kept turning. When it came over, it made a swishing sound. He flicked his finger, and a ray of purple lightning struck it. It exploded into countless pieces in midair. After entering the second realm, his mana was much stronger than before. His casual attack was comparable to the power of a supernatural power. The other party seemed to have noticed that the instrument was destroyed. In the distant sky, golden light shone brightly. Then, thousands of golden rays leaped out from the ground and flew into the sky. Then, they all landed in his direction. Scattered golden rays splashed everywhere, and when they landed on the ground, they shook the ground and created a deep hole. Mu Shoshan actually came over with a forceful attack. He did not use any probing methods. In other words, he did not even bother to do so. Zhang Yan looked up at the sky and let the air pressure above him flutter his sleeves. He had observed the fights between Hu Xian and Lu Junyang. When the two of them used the metal element, they both walked the path of flexibility and sharpness. He relied on technique to defeat strength, yet this person was different. His vital energy was extremely firm and powerful, and it was extremely unyielding and oppressive. It was as if he couldn't tolerate the slightest bit of disobedience while oppressing Qin Shi. He smirked and channeled his magic power. There was a loud sound. Boundless Xian Qi gushed out from behind him and surged upwards. The sky seemed to be divided into two halves. One half was bright and dazzling, melting gold and condensing light, while the other was dark and gloomy, mysterious and unfathomable. The two Dharma idols quickly collided, and the world within the small world shook violently. His suspicions crumbled. The stalemate lasted for only a moment before the golden light dispersed. When it looked like it couldn't hold on any longer, it continued to bombard him. For a moment, both sides were fighting with magic power from thousands of miles away. Zhang Yan could have taken out his killing sword, but after all, this was a fight between fellow disciples, not a life and death battle. He only needed to consider the outcome of the battle, so there was no need to do so. Even if he won, he wouldn't be able to prove himself against his opponent. Ever since he formed his grotto heaven, he had never met anyone who could fight head-on with his magic power. Usually, his opponents would try to avoid it, and they would stop before he could completely gather his aura. He didn't expect to meet someone who wouldn't retreat even if he fought to the death. His spirit was lifted, and he raised his magic power to another level. In such a dignified battle, the difference in strength was obvious. If one was strong, then one was strong. If one was weak, then one was weak. There was no possibility of falsehood. As he attacked, the golden light was continuously devoured by the mixed underworld qi. Half of the sky on the opposite side seemed to shatter like glass, and the light gradually dimmed. In an instant, everything became indistinguishable, as if it was going to return to the void. When he saw that he could not hold on any longer, countless cloud-like rays of light flew up. Once they were in midair, they scattered into countless streaks of golden light. When they were activated, they actually tore apart the thick, profound energy. It was clear that he saw that it was difficult for him to gain the upper hand in a battle of pure magic power, so he wanted to use his divine ability to salvage the situation. At this moment, Zhang Yan raised his hand, and boundless lightning flashed in the Xian Sea, bombarding the cloud light. The other party obviously didn't want to be outdone. Golden lights that were tens of thousands of feet long appeared, and they welcomed the attack with an even stronger momentum than just now. It was like a snake moving like a dragon, rolling and moving in the Xian Qi lightning sea. The sound of explosions in the sky connected the heavens and the earth. Under this battle of magic power, it actually caused the wind to howl, sand and stones to fly, and the mountains to tremble. But after a moment of collision, the golden Xian Qi in the sky was forced back again. The other side seemed to be surprised, and asked, "Who are you? Since when did Qinsang School have such a person like you?" Zhang Yan said in a clear voice, "I am Hall Master Du Zhen, Zhang Yan. Today, I came under the order of the headmaster to ask Shinran Mu, have you let go of your past thoughts?" The other side was silent for a moment, and a sneer was heard, "Does Qin Mabai think that he can make me admit defeat? If it wasn't for that person who refused to help me back then, causing me to only use half of my strength, I wouldn't be afraid even if the few people from the aristocratic families attacked together." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "So Jinren Mu is unwilling?" "That's right. I want Qin Mabai to give up his position as the headmaster. With Qinsang School in my hands, there's no need to hide and wait like when the late master was still alive. If anyone is dissatisfied, I can just kill them. As long as the 3 sects join forces to suppress the 6 main demon sects, then kill the remaining 7 sects, and divide the 9 continents equally, why should I be afraid of spiritual opportunity?" Zhang Yan said plainly, "After tens of thousands of years, when there's a lack of spiritual opportunity, the demons will cause trouble. What will Jinren do then?" Mu Shoushan sneered and said, "Then I'll just kill them again. Don't worry, with me in charge of the mountain, there will be a day when Qinsang School will monopolize the spiritual opportunity of the world and unite the 9 continents." Zhang Yan smiled. There was indeed more than one way to solve the lack of spiritual opportunity, and there was no right or wrong. However, to make it a reality, one had to take one step at a time. Who didn't know how to dream? However, if one could not even get out of this small world, it would just be a castle in the air, an illusion. Mu Shoushan was already a defeated person, and there was no possibility for him to make a comeback. His words seemed to be vigorous and full of fighting spirit, but to Shin Lian, it was equivalent to nonsense and useless. Mu Shoushan saw that Shin Lian did not speak, so he spoke again, "Hall Master Du Zhen, your skills are not bad. Why don't we work together and contact the people in the sect to force my junior brother to abdicate? Then, we'll clean up the filth in this world." Zhang Yan shook his head. Mu Shoushan was indeed unusually arrogant. However, he did not have the mood to argue with him. Since he could not reason with him, then he would use force to overcome him. Wherever the divine will passed. Droplets of Xianming heavy water appeared from the qi of heaven. When they reached the sky, they stopped moving. A cold voice came from the other side, "Since you went against my good intentions, then I'll take you down first. Once I get the pass talisman, I'll kill my way out. Look at what Qin Mabai has done to Qinsang School." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a low groan. Then, there seemed to be an invisible force that spread out in midair. The Xianming heavy water dispersed one by one, and the qi of heaven that filled the sky seemed to have met with some kind of shock. It started to disperse layer by layer. 9 mountain clear sound. Zhang Yan took out a spell, and clear energy spread out from his body to block it. He was at grade 5 of the power transformation realm. Even if he did not use spiritual power, he could use his body to block it. However, this was a technique that he had hidden for a long time. Unless it was a crucial moment, there was no need to show it. With the help of this divine ability, the bright golden light seemed to be able to counterattack. Not long after, it was pushed back 100 miles. His dharma spread out 10,000 miles. If this was all he could do, he did not care about it. However, that formless voice didn't stop. Wave after wave came, and in just a short period of time, the entire small world was trembling. The mountains around them were turned into dust by the tremors. When he fought with people before, he had never seen such a strong and violent attack. He did not care about spiritual power at all. He was relying on the help of the rebirth pool, using his divine ability as a normal method. This kind of attack leaned towards a strong attack. He did not care about any schemes. He just used his vast power and tidal divine ability to suppress the opponent. However, the opponent had an endless amount of spiritual power to spend, so he did not need to think about this. This was the only way he could use his advantage to the fullest. Using a strange method was giving up his strong points and choosing his weak points. It was no wonder that he dared to fight 1 against 2 just now. If such an enemy was not surrounded by killing true artifacts, even a few true masters of Grotto Heavens would not be able to do anything to him. From this, one could see how powerful ancestral patriarch Chen was when he was fighting. His peers would have to run away when they saw him, not daring to fight him head-on. But at this moment, he did not retreat at all. As his eyes flashed, a 5-colored light flashed behind him. Then, Xian Qi rolled and slowly changed. In the end, it turned into a giant hand that covered the sky. It reached out and sucked in the scattered Xian Qi around it. It became wider and wider. At first, it was only 1,000 feet wide, but after 1,000 miles, it had the power to cover the sky. Mu Shoshan knew how strong it was and immediately saw it as his main target. He used the sound of 9 mountains, as if he wanted to shatter it. But when the sound hit it, it did not have any effect. So, he scoffed coldly and didn't face the enemy's giant hand. Instead, he shook his sleeve and used the Daluo heavenly sleeve, wanting to suck Zhang Yan over. Zhang Yan saw the endless yellow qi surging out from his sleeve. How could he not know what kind of magical power it was? He didn't bother about it either. He just looked for the main target and pointed forward. Mu Shoshan suddenly felt an unusual change in the spiritual vigor around him. His expression changed and he immediately channeled his mana. Golden light leaped in front of and behind him. In the next moment, there was a rumbling sound. Countless lightning bolts leaped out from beside him and struck his body. He could only defend with all his might and did not have the time to control the Daluo heavenly sleeve. This was the Qingxian soaring thunderclap, and it was deduced by Zhang Yan with the 5-element movement technique and the lightning technique of his sect as the foundation. It was capable of leaping through the air to suddenly arrive at the side of the opponent before blasting it apart. It could be said to be impossible to guard against or avoid, and it had to be dealt with by a magic treasure or divine ability. When utilized at a critical moment, it was sufficient to turn the situation of the battle around. After Mu Shoshan stabilized his defense, he thought to himself, this person is also a cultivator from the Qinsang school. He knows the weakness of my magical power. Plus, he came here prepared. I can only use a technique that he has never seen before. I have seen Hall Master Du Zhen before, I don't know whose disciple he is. Since I don't know his background, I will try this technique. With a flip of his palm, a beam of yellow light shot out from his palm, gathering all of the shattered rocks and rock fragments. In just a few breaths of time, all of the sand and soil within a 10,000-kilometer radius had been absorbed into this beam of light. This technique was called the 10,000 spaces as one. It was learned from the second-generation sect leader's legacy. It was suspected that it was passed down by the Tai Ming patriarch. When one mastered it, he could gather the mountains in the world in his palm and use it to suppress his opponent. He patted his sleeve, and the light shot into the sky, directly entering the large hand. However, the latter didn't seem to be affected at all. It continued to move forward with an unstoppable momentum, and the golden chi along the way shattered one after another. Seeing that it was useless, Mu Shoshan frowned and tried a few more techniques. However, he couldn't move it at all. Seeing that the giant hand was getting closer and closer, he subconsciously reached into his sleeve but found nothing. He couldn't help but snort. After he was imprisoned by sect leader Qin and the other cultivators in the sect, all his talismans were taken away. Even the golden stone that he shot out just now was something he had casually refined in the past. That was why he didn't have a single talisman. Otherwise, he could take it out to defend himself. However, with his current arrogant and conceited personality, he was absolutely unwilling to retreat just like that. He immediately took out a spell, and the golden chi behind him swirled like water, drifting like a wheel. Very quickly, it expanded and covered the top of the mountain he was standing on. From afar, it looked like there was a golden sun flowing with rainbow light on the flat ground. This technique was called golden scale armor removal. Once this technique was used, it could divert all the talismans and techniques that came at it. As for its effectiveness, it depended on the skill of the person who used it. The giant hand quickly arrived in front of him. However, the technique that Mu Shoshan had high hopes for was unable to stop it at all. It shattered under the pressure of the hand. This Taishian Qi 5 Elements hand hid the changes of the 5 elements. It was originally created by Zhang Yan to deal with true treasures. No matter how many techniques were used, they couldn't shatter it. If one didn't understand its mysteries, there was no other way other than dodging or using a talisman to block it. Mu Shoshan stared into the air with a serious expression. However, even at this point, he still didn't retreat. He shouted and yellow light gathered. A towering mountain rose up as if it was going to hold up the hand. Zhang Yan looked over and saw that the 5 elements hand was already in the sky above the mountain. He raised his sleeve and made a gesture of pressing down with his palm. Boom! With just one slap, the mountain was shattered and smashed heavily onto the ground. The entire small world seemed to shake, and dust billowed into the sky. Through his chi, he felt that the vibrations that spread out only lasted for a while before calming down. It was obvious that the matrix in the small world was working to prevent the aftershocks from spreading further. If this attack had landed on the Donghua continent just now, it would have destroyed half of the continent and cut off the spiritual opportunity of the earth. If not for the fact that this small world was boundless and that there was a matrix to suppress it, he wouldn't have dared to use such a technique. After a few breaths, countless golden and yellow lights gathered from all directions and gathered in one place. Zhang Yan knew that just now, he hadn't really destroyed the other's dharma. Instead, it had dissipated on its own in the end. If it was a normal person from the grotto heaven, doing this would definitely hurt their vitality. However, Mu Shoshan had the pool of creation and could do this without hesitation. The only damage would probably be the other's face. Chapter 1102. After Shenbai Shuang came out, he went back to the minor frigid realm. There was a restrictive spell formation there, so he couldn't see what was going on inside. After thinking about it for a moment, he decided to go outside. When they arrived at the realm pass, they saw Qin Yu standing in front of the gate. Daoist Yuan, who was guarding the gate, was trembling and didn't dare to make a sound. He landed on the ground and cupped his hands, saying, "Greetings, senior sister." Qin Yu shifted her gaze and asked, "Junior Marshal Brother, did you and Zhang Yan come to see Senior Marshal Brother Mu?" Shenbai Shuang nodded and said, "Yes." Qin Yu was silent for a while before asking, "How is it?" When Elder Yuan heard this, his expression flickered, and he groaned inwardly. These two were talking about secrets of the sect, so how could he possibly listen to them? However, he didn't dare to just walk away. Therefore, he looked over at Shenbai Shuang with a pleading expression. When Shenbai Shuang saw this, he waved his hand. Elder Yuan let out a long sigh, cupped his hands, and left. Shenbai Shuang thought for a moment and decided to tell the truth. She sighed and said, "Brother Priest is still stubborn. I see that he has been imprisoned for many years and has a lot of resentment in his heart. He only said a few words when he came up and wanted to vent his anger on the two of us. It's not good for me to take action, so I came out first. I'm afraid that Hall Master Du Zhen is still fighting with him. But senior sister doesn't need to worry, as long as the two of them fight to the death, there shouldn't be any problem. Qin Yushin sighed softly and said, how can I not be worried? Previously, sect leader senior brother ordered Zhang Yan to meet senior brother Yan. It's not like you don't know what happened to senior brother Yan. Now that Zhang Yan has cultivated to the middle of the second tier, his mana is even stronger than before. Senior brother Qin has been imprisoned for so many years, and his skills are already rusty. How can he be his opponent? Shen Baishuang comforted her, the situation this time is different from the last time. Brother priest did not break out of the door, but because he was imprisoned for more than 800 years, he was not able to escape. Otherwise, sect head senior brother wouldn't have ordered the Duzhen Palace Lord to come here. Taking a step back, even if senior brother Mu had that kind of intention, he could only make noise. What could he do now? Sect leader Shixiang can even accept eldest Shixiang's disciple, how can he not accept Shixiang? Qin Yu pondered for a moment and felt that what he said made sense. She felt slightly relieved. This sect leader Shixiang was now firmly in control of the mountain gate. In terms of prestige, he was even more powerful than when her father was still alive. At least at that time, he Jingchen and the others had always disagreed with him. But now, it was the sect leader who could decide everything. Mu Shoushan had been trapped in the small world for a long time and he really wanted to take his life. All he had to do was to trap it with a forbidden formation. There was no need to go through so much trouble. In the small world, the light in the sky dissipated and Mu Shoushan gathered his avatar again. His expression was unsightly. When the huge hand came crashing down, he had no way of blocking it. In the end, he chose to disperse his Dharma power to avoid it. He had always been arrogant and thought that few people in his generation were his match. Only Yan Changsheng and Li Gezhang were worthy of his attention, but he had never fought them before. He also didn't think that if they really fought, they would lose with the strength of two spirits. As for the younger generation in his sect, he didn't care about any of them at all. He didn't think that Palace Master Duzhen would have the power to suppress his own sect, especially since he didn't use any treasures and was fighting him purely with magic power. It could be said that he had lost completely. At this point, although he was extremely unwilling, he had to admit that if he didn't try to avoid a head-on fight with this person, he would definitely be defeated. The path of attack. If he didn't do this, he wouldn't be able to defeat his opponent. Then he had to find another way. No matter how arrogant he was, he wouldn't fight to the end. Otherwise, he would have been killed by one palm just now. Luckily, he still had the pool of creation. With this treasure, he had many ways to deal with it. He believed that as long as he persevered, the final victor would be his sect. He shook his body and separated out a ball of chi of origin. Then, he pointed with his finger and a yang manifestation spiritual body appeared. This wasn't the end. Next, he formed another ball of chi of origin and similarly formed a manifestation spiritual body. At this moment, these two clones each took up 30% of his magic power. Compared to his fundamental body, they weren't much different. After he finished doing this, he said loudly, "Just now, you didn't attack me when I was spreading out my body. Even though I'm not afraid, I don't want to owe you a favor. Let me make things clear to you first. This yang manifestation spiritual body is nourished by the water from the pool of creation and can last for a few days. It won't dissipate in a day or two, and its magic power isn't weaker than mine. When we fight it later, you have to be careful." Zhang Yan smiled. Just now, he didn't attack while he was winning. It wasn't that he was being merciful, it was because it was hard to find such a good practice target. Just now, his opponent was just at a disadvantage because his magic power wasn't as strong as Mu Shoushan's and he wasn't willing to admit defeat. He hadn't used all his skills yet, so even if he won, he wouldn't benefit much. After Mu Shoushan spoke, the three figures charged forward at the same time. When they were still 1,000 miles away, they suddenly flashed and used a teleportation technique to enter the inner circle. They surrounded Zhang Yan in the air from 3 directions. Between the 3 of them, there was a golden light that seemed to be connected. The person on the left opened his sleeve and used the Daluo heavenly sleeve. A faint yellow gas surged down. Zhang Yan's thoughts turned, but before he could break it, he saw the manifestation spiritual body on the right open its mouth and chant. It used the clear sound of 9 great mountains on him. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. If he stood where he was and defended, then the Daluo heavenly sleeve would definitely hit him. Even if it couldn't move him with its magic power, don't forget that Mu Shoshan's manifestation was still above and hadn't attacked. If there were no accidents, he definitely had a backup plan. His eyes flashed. Using the high sky thunder shock to break the situation was the best. However, when he leaped out of the void, there would be a moment of delay. Mu Shoshan had seen this technique just now, so he wouldn't be unprepared. He might have been waiting for him to do so. Therefore, with a thought, Xian Qi surged outside his body and blocked the 2 sides. The clear sound of 9 great mountains charged first and broke through the layers of resistance. However, this formless power was weakened by the layers of resistance. When it really reached him, it would be like an arrow at the end of its flight. However, the manifestation spiritual body on the right knew this was going to happen, so it didn't stop and activated its magic power. In one breath, it released more than 10 sounds, as though it wanted to break through the obstacles in front of it. With that, Zhang Yan shook his sleeve and a clear qi spun around him. Before the sound could reach him, it seemed to have hit an invisible barrier. Even though it broke through the surrounding Xian Qi, it couldn't move forward in front of this light. This was purely using magic to isolate the inside from the outside. If he didn't have such a foundation, even if he used it, he might not have been able to block the attack. Mu Shoshan stared at the front and kept looking for a loophole, but Zhang Yan dealt with it calmly. Therefore, he couldn't find a chance. However, if he didn't attack now, then the attack just now would be meaningless. So, he formed a spell with his fingers and countless spots of yellow light appeared in the void behind him. They were of different sizes and there were tens of thousands of them. He only let out a deep shout. They were like meteors that shot down like bolts of lightning. This technique was called chaotic dust and stars. It was a Taoist technique. Anyone who cultivated the Kun Jade dust technique and had a deep understanding of it would be able to learn this technique. Every strand of dust had a weight of 10,000 caddies. Just a little was nothing to the cultivators of the Grotto Heaven realm, but if they got too much of it, it would become heavier. Until they couldn't take it anymore, they wouldn't even be able to escape. When that happened, they would be at the mercy of others. Zhang Yan faced the attacks from all directions. He first waved his sleeve and a green light shot out from his Xian Qi. There seemed to be countless branches and thorns within it. The yellow energy from the Daluo heavenly sleeves was tangled up by it. It actually couldn't reach him. At that moment, the Daluo heavenly sleeves arrived and covered him. Instantly, there was a huge suction force that sucked in the surrounding sand and stones. However, due to the clear qi, he stood still and couldn't be sucked in. He suddenly looked up. His eyes flashed. Mu Shoshan sensed that something was wrong and flew up. As expected, the moment he took a step forward, there was an explosion of thunder. If it wasn't for the movement of the high sky lightning when he leaped out, people with sharp senses would have been able to sense where he was. He would probably have suffered a huge loss. Seeing that, Zhang Yan thought to himself, this high sky lightning fruit still has some flaws. I can try to improve it when I get back. This was also the reason why he fought with Mu Shoshan. Firstly, he could use his opponent to test how strong he was. Secondly, he wanted to see if the divine art that he deduced was really useful in the battle formation. Although he was deep in thought, his hands didn't slow down at all. He used all his spiritual power and in an instant, there were high sky lightning in all directions. Even though this technique had some flaws, no matter what kind of divine art it was, as long as there were enough of it, it would be enough to defeat the enemy. From time to time, a bolt of lightning would strike down from the void, forcing the three figures to flee. Zhang Yan's gaze swept over them. He noticed that after the two of them used their innate abilities, their figures seemed to become a little blurry. However, it only lasted for a short while before they gradually recovered. It was clear that the water from the creation pool was supporting their bodies. He couldn't help but be surprised and thought to himself, with this item, I'm already close to a third-stage cultivator in some areas. Once a cultivator refined an origin fetus, they would be filled with spiritual qi. Like a vast lake, it would be difficult to dry up and they wouldn't be afraid of fighting for a long time. What was even more amazing was that the manifest yang spirit body could be split into multiple copies. At the second stage, the more barriers one broke through, the stronger the spirit body's spiritual power would be. If one reached the sixth stage and above, their spiritual power would be comparable to a normal cave. This was also why the Yuxiao school was afraid of the Jade Tomb Patriarch. With his power, one person could fight against an entire sect. Although Mu Shoshan and his two clones were moving back and forth, dodging the lightning bolts, they were still within 1,000 miles of Zhang Yan. Occasionally, they would even counterattack. At this time, because they weren't fighting head-on, all they had to do was dodge the incoming attacks. They were of the same mind, so their battle prowess didn't decrease compared to just now. This was actually the method of fighting that he hated the most. However, he had no choice but to use this method to drag the battle on. He had the pool of rebirth to rely on, so he wasn't afraid of losing his spiritual power. However, his opponent was different. At the very least, he could force his opponent to retreat. After the two of them fought for an hour, Zhang Yan saw that Mu Shoshan didn't have any more tricks up his sleeves. What was left was a battle of attrition, so Zhang Yan didn't have the mood to continue fighting. Thus, he circulated his spiritual power. There was a loud boom, and the Xian Qi beneath his feet started to surge. It was like a tidal wave rushing into the sky. It was so turbulent that even the heavens and earth changed color. Mu Shoshan was shocked. He didn't know when, but the Xian Qi that was thousands of miles long had surged towards the center from all directions. He looked up and saw that there was a crack in the sky that was slowly closing up. It looked like he could escape if he rushed out in time. However, he didn't dare to go in that direction. He was afraid that his opponent had purposely left a trap for him to jump into. Thus, he forcefully suppressed the thoughts in his heart and turned around to look. However, at this moment, Zhang Yan's figure had vanished within the boundless profound energy, and he was unable to find his location any longer. Obviously, Zhang Yan didn't even give him the chance to turn around and fight. At that moment, he could only think of a way to escape. He leaped up and charged towards the only place that looked like a path. However, before he reached the top, he saw the Xian Qi above him stir and transform into a giant hand. It pressed down from above and completely sealed off his path. Zhang Yan watched calmly from within the Xian Qi. Mu Shoshan charging here was like a battle between two armies. As long as he combined the Xian Qi around him, he would be able to surround him. However, since he dared to come in, he believed that he had a way to escape. It was obviously impossible to force his way out by using magical techniques. That would be equivalent to competing with him in terms of spiritual power. Moreover, his cave had long been sealed by the array. The only way left was to use his teleportation technique to hide in the outside world. As expected, Mu Shoshan saw that he couldn't do anything and ordered the two prominent yang spirit bodies to block the giant hand. He took out a technique and looked like he was about to escape. Unexpectedly, at that moment, Zhang Yan stretched out his hand and grabbed at him from afar. He used a 5 elements escape technique. Mu Shoshan's body shook. At the same time, dozens of lightning bolts exploded beside him. There was a series of explosions in the sky. After the lightning bolts faded, Mu Shoshan was seen standing in midair with his eyes closed. He didn't speak or move. At that moment, Zhang Yan suddenly felt that there was no longer the vicious aura around him. His brows slowly calmed down. It was obvious that the spirit had retreated just now. After a while, Mu Shoushan slowly opened his eyes. He looked around and saw Zhang Yan standing there as if he was the same as when they first met. He had already guessed the result. He sighed and said, "Looks like Hall Master Duzhen didn't manage to convince him." Instead, he managed to convince him. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "He might not be convinced, but there's no need for him to be convinced. I just need him to know that it's best to let go of those wild thoughts." Mu Shoushan sighed and said, "Hall Master Duzhen, good move." Zhang Yan looked at him and asked, "Jinren Mu, this humble Taoist has a question. The Lake of Rebirth is incomparably marvelous, and that person has used it to the extreme. However, could it be that the life force and energy essence within this treasure will never be exhausted?" Mu Shoushan smiled and said, "It's not like that. In Ancestor Chen's will, it briefly mentioned that there are 6 types of sky demon blood in this treasure. After being refined, it will turn turbid and pure. It can replenish one's vitality and qi. As for normal times, it needs to accumulate spiritual opportunity. The purpose of this is to support another enlightened master in the sect. However, after Ancestor Chen, this treasure didn't have an owner. When I got my hands on it, it had been accumulating for close to 10,000 years. I'm afraid I can't use up all the water in the pool in a short period of time." Zhang Yan finally understood. He nodded and said, "I see." Mu Shoushan looked over and said, "Speaking of this, I still have a doubt in my heart. Ever since the two of us became enlightened masters, we have never worked together to fight against an enemy. Even when he was captured by the sect, I didn't come out to help him. I don't know if there's anyone in the same generation who can resist the two of us working together. Hall Master Duzhen seems to be doing it with ease. I wonder if you can give me an answer." Chapter 1103. Zhang Yan had fought just now. Although he had lost some mana, with his current foundation, it would not be a problem for him to fight again. However, he did not reply to Mu Shoushan immediately. Instead, he asked, "Can you talk to that person?" Mu Shoushan was stunned and smiled. "There's no need to talk. If he wants to know, he will know. However, I have an agreement with him that we will handle our own matters and not interfere with each other." "N is an element of," Zhang Yan smiled. "Then, I still have to ask. Jinren Mu, are you willing to let go of your past thoughts?" Mu Shoushan scoffed. He lowered his head as if he was listening to something. After a while, he shook his head. He is still stubborn. He looked up. "From what I see, if Hall Master Duzhen can win against the two of us, we might be able to convince him to let go of his past thoughts." Zhang Yan said, "Of course I would like to experience it, but not today." Mu Shoushan nodded. Just now Hall Master Duzhen fought with him and used up a lot of his mana. It would not be fair for you to fight again. Zhang Yan shook his head. That's not the case. He made up his mind. Along with a cry, a sword light leaped out from his back. It was brilliant and overflowing with clear energy. It circled around his body and gave birth to strands of clear and shocking rainbows. Mu Shoushan's expression changed. He stared at the sword gleam and said with a solemn expression, "Killing sword?" Zhang Yan looked over and said, "Jinren Mu has been imprisoned for so many years and does not even have a suitable enchanted artifact. I think it would be an unfair fight against the two of you." Mu Shoushan thought about it and sighed. He nodded and admitted, "Hall Master Duzhen is right. You have a killing true artifact. If I don't have an enchanted artifact to defend, I can only avoid it. However, you can use your sword to travel through space. Even if I have some experience in escaping techniques, I can only escape with my mana. It is impossible for me to win against you." Zhang Yan said seriously, "After I return, I will persuade sect leader to remove the forbidden abode. Return Daoist's magic treasures. Once Daoist's strength has recovered, the two of us can compete again." He could tell that Mu Shoushan was restricted by his current predicament and could not use many of his powerful techniques. If he was defeated under such circumstances, Mu Shoushan would not be convinced. If that was the case, he might as well return the Heaven's Grotto Heaven to him. At that time, they could have a proper discussion. That would be for the best. If not, it would depend on the sect leader's opinion. When Mu Shoshan heard this, he did not look happy. Instead, he frowned and raised his head. He said in a deep voice, "May I ask Hall Master Duzhen what happened in the sect?" Zhang Yan said meaningfully, "Don't worry, Jinren. Now, our Qinsang school has 14 Taoist grotto heavens, but no one dares to bully us. But if one doesn't think far ahead, one will have immediate worries. Nothing happens now, but that doesn't mean nothing will happen in the future." 14 grotto heavens? Mu Shoshan's eyelids twitched. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If there's a chance, we can talk about this in the future. I'll take my leave now." He bowed, turned into a ray of light, and flew out. Mu Shoshan watched as the light flew out of the small world. He closed his eyes, as though he was talking to someone. After a while, he opened his eyes and muttered to himself, "So this Hall Master Duzhen has not used any artifact just now. No wonder he has the confidence to do this. He seemed to have thought of something." He frowned and pondered, 14 grotto heavens, what is junior brother Qin trying to do? Maybe I've been tired for too long. It's time for me to go out. After Zhang Yan flew out of the small world, he walked out again. When he reached the door, he saw Shen Baishuang and Qin Yu at the door. He bowed to Shen Baishuang and said, "Thank you for waiting, Jinren Shen." Then, he bowed to Qin Yu and said, "Greetings, Jinren Qin." Qin Yu quietly returned the greeting, but she did not say anything. She looked at Shen Baishuang, and the latter asked, "How is Brother Mu?" Zhang Yan replied, "Jinren Mu is fine, but the demon in his heart has not been removed. He still needs to meditate in seclusion." Qin Yu breathed a sigh of relief. She nodded to Zhang Yanwei and transmitted a few words to Shen Baishuang before turning around and leaving. Shen Baishuang said, "Since the matter here has been settled, I will return to the Golden Pavilion. If Hall Master Duzhen does not have any instructions, why don't we go together?" Zhang Yan could tell that he had something to say, so he agreed. The two of them flew back the way they came. On the way, Shen Baishuang said, "A few years ago, I took in a disciple. His aptitude is not bad, but he is partial to the sword Dao. He is not willing to learn other paths. I think that the sword scripture in the sect is shallow, and I have nothing to teach him. I would like to ask for a favor from Hall Master Duzhen. Could you help me to teach him a thing or two?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "That is easy, but it is not convenient to go to the Hall of Duzhen. Jinren Shen, you can let him go to the Spirit Page Island another day. I can give him a fated chance." Shen Baishuang thanked him solemnly when he saw that he had agreed. Zhang Yan was now the Hall Master Duzhen. His position in the sect was just below the sect master. It would be a great honor to ask him to teach. However, the aptitude of his new disciple was not bad, and it was very likely that he would bring glory to the sect in the future. Therefore, he would rather owe him a favor and help him build a solid foundation. It did not take long for the two of them to return to the floating heavenly palace. After saying goodbye to Shen Baishuang in front of the palace, Zhang Yan went to the main hall. After reporting to the sect master, he asked someone to invite him into the hall. After entering the inner room, he bowed and sat down. Sect Master Qin asked, "How was the trip, Hall Master Duzhen?" Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, "Although Jinren Mu has an obsession, it is only an obsession. It is not irresolvable." Sect Master Qin asked gently, "Then what does Hall Master Duzhen mean?" Zhang Yan said, "If a person like Jinren Mu is willing to contribute to the sect, he will be able to add a great combat force to our Qinsang school before the great calamity. Allow me some time, and I will be able to give Sect Master an explanation." Sect Master Qin nodded and said, "Then I will leave this matter to Hall Master Duzhen. Regardless of the final outcome, you only need to inform me." Zhang Yan agreed. After thinking for a while, he said, "There is one more thing. Can you return the treasures that Jinren Mu used in the past?" I would also like to ask Sect Master Du Zhen to open the restriction on his grotto heaven. He did this because the grotto heaven was also a part of an elephant realm cultivator's strength, and there might be many old items in it. Sect Master Qin did not ask him the reason. He waved his horsetail whisk, and 3 items flew from the sky and slowly landed in front of him. They were 2 jade boxes and a talisman. He tapped the talisman with his horsetail whisk and said, "This talisman can open the grotto heaven, and it can also seal it at any time. Hall Master Du Zhen, please use it well." As Zhang Yan's spirit moved, the talisman flew in front of him. He raised his hand and held it in his palm. He used his magic power to probe it, and he knew that this item could isolate the connection between the grotto heaven and its owner. However, this did not mean that after the restriction was removed, Mu Shoushan would no longer be restricted. There was a formation within the Qinsang school. If he did not have permission, no matter where he wanted to go, he would not be able to. He could only go back and forth from the small world he lived in. As for going outside the sect, unless he could use his own strength to suppress the Mountain Gates formation, he could forget about it. He waved his sleeve and put the jade boxes and the talisman into his bag. Since this matter was over, he said a few more words before getting up to leave. After leaving the main hall and returning to the Duzhen Hall, he first adjusted his breathing and cultivated. After only an hour, he was already full of energy and vigor. He reached into his sleeves. He took out 2 gray round stones. They were the 2 abyss toads that he got from the North Ocean. He placed his palm on them and gently rubbed them. The abundant spiritual energy from the outside flowed into the inside. The reason why the 2 abyss toads fell asleep was because there were no rams that were filled with spiritual energy above the North Ocean. However, this place was different. It was where the 3 upper halls of the Qinsang school were, and the outside couldn't be compared to it. A short moment later, it started to shake. However, one of them, it just shook a few times, and then it stopped moving. Zhang Yan looked over. This one didn't have enough life force, and it didn't have much lifespan left. Even if it could come out now, it wouldn't be of much use. As for the other one, it kept shaking without stopping. In the end, the hard shell shattered, and with a croak, a large toad jumped out. Its entire body was bright and translucent, as if it was carved out of crystal. It squatted on the table and looked around sneakily. Then, it secretly looked at Zhang Yan, and its body shuddered. Then, it leaned forward like a human and said, "Thank you, Celestial Master, for saving my life." Zhang Yan looked down and said, "You don't have to thank me, I'm looking for you because I want to use you." The giant toad said, Yes, my life was saved by Celestial Master. In the future, I'll do whatever Celestial Master wants me to do." Zhang Yan asked, "Do you have a surname?" The giant toad's eyes shone, and it glanced at the stone shell on the other side. "My surname is Yuzu." Zhang Yan said, "Your vitality has been depleted for a long time. Find a place to stay, adjust your qi dynamic, and recover your mana. I'll call you when I need you." Yuzu was overjoyed. "I have thick skin and flesh, so I'm easy to take care of. The water here is rich, so there must be a lot of food. Celestial Master only needs to let me enter the water to cultivate, and I'll be able to replenish my vitality very quickly. I'm honest, and I'll definitely repay your kindness. If you need anything, I'll definitely be there." Zhang Yan looked at it and said with a faint smile, "I see that you look simple and honest, but you're actually cunning. You're not as honest as you say." Yuzu's eyes rolled around, and it said, "What are you talking about, Celestial Master? I'm just an uneducated person, so I really don't understand." Zhang Yan smiled. "It doesn't matter if you understand or not. You've just arrived at my place, so I can't let you wander around. Someone has to control you." He called the formation spirit over, and he said, "I'll leave it to you. As long as it's alive and can be used by me, you can do whatever you want." The formation spirit chuckled, and it said, "Don't worry, Master, I'll definitely make this demon toad obedient." Zhang Yan waved his hand. The formation spirit bowed, and with a flick of its sleeve, it kept Yuzu into its sleeve before leaving. After it left, Zhang Yan thought about Shenbai Shuang's request earlier, and it seemed that he valued that disciple a lot. If he only wanted to learn ordinary sword skills, there were many famous flying sword masters in the sect. For example, Feng Ming, who was Elder Sun's disciple, was more than enough to teach a junior disciple. However, Shenbai Shuang didn't look for them, but came to his place to ask for a favor, so it was obvious that he wanted to learn a superior sword skill. Now, in Qinsang school, no one could compare to him in this aspect. Shenbai Shuang had taken care of him in the past, and since this matter came to him, he had to give him an explanation. Therefore, with a thought, a sword ray flew out from between his brows, out of Xuanzi Ocean, and headed towards the Dragon Lake. There was a ray of his split light shadow hidden within, and it was enough to teach that disciple. After doing this, he thought about the verification he had with Mu Shoshan. There were many flaws in the high-altitude lightning technique that he had created. He had to make another deduction. Thus, he waved his sleeves and closed the door of the hall. He sat down and entered seclusion. Spirit Page Island. A beam of light flew over and arrived outside. When the light dispersed, Zhang Yan's doppelganger turned into a shadow and walked out. With a sweep of his gaze, the restrictions on the island were removed. Then, he slowly descended from the cloud. He looked around his surroundings. This was the first place he'd set foot in after entering the Dark Azure sect, and it was also here that he could be considered to have truly stepped onto the path of cultivation. Yet he never imagined that 700 years had passed in the blink of an eye, and it truly caused him to sigh endlessly with emotion. He walked along the mountain stairs to the cave abode on the island, and looked up. Although this place had been lent to the disciples for cultivation, they didn't dare to stay in the cave as they respected their masters. They had opened up another cave abode behind the mountain, so the layout inside had not changed, and it was still the same as when he left. He sat on the cattail hassock, and heard a rustling sound. He saw a 5-colored spirit lizard crawling out from a crack in the wall. When he saw it, he smiled, "So you're still here." The spirit lizard's lifespan was only about 100 years, but after Zhang Yan left, the cave abode was sealed, and it fell into a deep sleep. Now that the restriction was lifted, it woke up, but it thought that its master had just returned from outside. Zhang Yan changed his mind, and sent a spiritual vigor into its body, saying, "It's up to you now." A few days later, a small boat came from outside the Spirit Page Island, and there were 2 teenagers on it. One was a boy and the other was a girl, and they were both about 15 or 16 years old. They were dressed in the same coarse clothes, and they looked like a pair of brother and sister. The girl had 2 buns, and she looked pretty. Her eyes were bright, and she sat at the bow of the boat, looking around curiously. The boy, on the other hand, was rowing with all his might, wiping the sweat on his forehead from time to time. The girl looked at his embarrassed look, and she giggled. She used her slender fingers to stroke her fair cheeks, and said, "Senior brother, aren't you ashamed? Rowing a small boat is so tiring, and you still call yourself a cultivator." The boy rolled his eyes, and said snappily, "The water in the great pool of Dragon Abyss is muddy, how can it be compared to the rivers in the outside world?" The girl counted with her fingers, and said with a smile, "You deserve it, senior brother. You even boasted in front of Master that you could reach the Spirit Page Island in a day. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's been 5 days, and you're still not here. I'm afraid that Master has been waiting for you for a long time, and has left." The boy retorted, "Nonsense, that Master is cultivating on the island, how can he leave?" Although he was not willing to admit defeat, he was worried about his gains and losses. His master, after finding him, threw a book to him, and then disappeared all day. He only stayed for a few days when he opened his meridians. He also said that there were sword immortals on the Spirit Page Island, and if he wanted to learn the flying sword art, he had to sincerely look for them. That was why he rowed the boat personally. Fortunately, he was not far from the island. He looked at the billowing smoke on the island, and although there was surprise in his eyes, there was also a look of anticipation. He wiped his sweat, and started rowing again. Chapter 1104. The young man and woman soon arrived at the shore of Spirit Page Island. However, once they arrived, they felt a gust of hot air hitting them in the face. After a while, both of them were drenched in sweat. The young man was speechless. This place is so hot. Tisk, tisk. The young girl's face was also flushed. She asked curiously, "Doesn't Celestial Master feel uncomfortable living here?" The young man chuckled and said, "Since he's in Celestial Master, why would he be afraid of this heat? When your senior brother's cultivation level increases in the future, it won't be a problem." The young girl pouted and said, "Senior brother, you're bragging again." She then looked at the island full of ancient trees and said worriedly, "This island is so big, where can we find that Celestial Master?" The young man was exhausted. However, after reaching the shore, he did not forget to drag the small boat up. Then, he spread his arms and legs and plopped on the beach. He panted and said, I'm so tired. Junior sister, I'll rest for a while and go up the mountain to look for Celestial Master later." The young girl was puzzled and said, "Senior brother, since you've already opened your meridians, why don't you use spiritual opportunity to recover?" The young man waved his hand weakly and said, "Just now, I've already tried. This island's malevolent aura is extremely strong and will consume spiritual opportunity. There's no way to regulate one's breathing." The young girl acknowledged and her eyes lit up. She said, "Senior brother, rest well. I'll protect you. Even if there are tigers, wolves, and poisonous insects, I'll help you deal with them." The young man said weakly, "Thank you, junior sister." As soon as he finished speaking, he tilted his head and fell into a deep sleep. He slept very soundly. When he woke up, he felt refreshed. He looked around and did not know whether to laugh or cry. His junior sister was also hugging her knees and sleeping soundly. It was already nighttime. However, the volcanoes here erupted all year round. In addition to the spiritual opportunity fluctuations, the island was wrapped in a golden red flame. It looked very magnificent. At this moment, he suddenly saw a ray of light flying away in the sky. It was as graceful as a dragon and unusually agile. After circling one round, it finally flew into a cliff. Although it only took a few breaths, he felt that it was extraordinary. However, he could sense the extraordinariness of it. He could not help but widen his eyes and shout, "Sword immortal." The young man suddenly felt that if he didn't go over now, then he would very likely miss the opportunity. He subconsciously ran a few steps, and suddenly remembered that it was inappropriate to leave his junior sister here, so he hurriedly turned around and woke her up. The girl was still drowsy and confused. As if he didn't want to wake up for a while, he didn't explain anything. After saying that, he sprinted in the direction of the rainbow. Although the vegetation here was dense and thorny, he was already at the meridian opening stage and could be considered a Taoist. In addition, his heart was filled with the desire to seek Tao. However, he had opened up a path from the inside. After walking for more than an hour, they finally found a flight of stairs in the depths of the forest. It looked like it could lead to the top of the cliff. He climbed up excitedly and soon reached the waist of the mountain. He drilled out from a small path and turned a corner. He found himself on a platform that was several acres in size. This place was spacious. If one looked down from here, they could see the scenery below the island. However, if one raised their head and looked up, they would see a row of stone stairs sticking close to the cliff. There were no supports at the bottom. They were inserted into the hard rock in the air. The lengths of the stairs were uneven, the longest was not more than half a foot, and the shortest was not more than the width of a palm. There were even a few places with only gaps. Just looking at them would make one tremble in fear. This path extended diagonally upwards, and at the end was a cave covered by vines. Rays of light shone out from inside. When the young man saw this, he was extremely excited. He knew that he had found the right place. He kowtowed on the platform and said, "Disciple Chui Xianping, under the orders of my master, has come to learn the flying sword technique." After a while, a voice came from above, who is your master? Cui Xianping touched his head and said embarrassedly, master never says his real name. Usually, it is only me and my junior sister who cultivates. He also doesn't allow me to meet outsiders, so I can't find out what his name is. That voice said again, if you want to see me, you can come to the cave. Cui Xianping took a look. To enter the cave, he had to go up the stone stairs. Even though he had opened his meridians, if he fell from such a high place, he would definitely die. However, he did not retreat. He took a deep breath and went up to test his feet. Seeing that he could stand firmly, he slowly moved along the cliff. However, he quickly noticed that something was wrong. It clearly looked like a short path, but it was enveloped in a layer of mist. After walking for a few hours, he actually still hadn't arrived before the abode. He couldn't help but shout, Senior, are you still there? That voice said, what, are you going to give up? If so, I can send you down. Cui Xianping let out a sigh of relief and smiled, disciple is just afraid that senior can't wait to leave. There was no more sound from above. Cui Xianping chuckled and started to move up step by step. After walking for 3 days and 3 nights, the fog in front of him that blocked his vision finally dispersed. His eyes couldn't help but light up. Even though he didn't have much strength left, he still gritted his teeth and held on for the last part of the road. When he reached the door of the cave, he finally fell to the ground and fainted. Zhang Yan's clone sat in the cave and looked over. He subconsciously nodded his head. The stone stairs outside were made by him using mana. Even though this path couldn't compare to Shaoqing Sect's heart-refining chain, he could use it to see what kind of Wushan Baishuang's disciple was and how much he could bear. He stretched out a finger and a streak of mana landed on the youth's brow. Cui Xianping seemed to be doused with cold water. He unconsciously shivered and climbed up from where he was. He raised his head and saw a young Taoist sitting on a praying mat. The Taoist's eyes were extremely deep. He instantly became extremely happy and knelt down, greetings, Celestial Master. Zhang Yan's clone grunted and said, since you're here to learn the sword, do you have a sword pellet with you? Cui Xianping said excitedly, yes, my master heard that I wanted to learn the sword, so he specially found one for me. The clone said, take it out and let me see. Cui Xianping carefully took out a lead-white sword pellet. He lightly used mana and it flew up and hung above his head. But that was all he could do. If he tried to control it again, it would immediately fall. The clone said, yes, this is made from ordinary lead gold. Even though it's not a real sword pellet, it's enough for you now. Cui Xianping said, yes, my master also said that I can't use a real sword pellet right now. He said that after I truly learn the skill, I can make another one for me. The clone thought to himself, Jinrenshin really values this disciple. But isn't it too much to nurture him like this? He thought about it again and vaguely guessed some of the reasons. Maybe it was because the calamity was coming and Shen Baishuang was not sure if his family could survive the war, so he was anxious to find someone who could inherit his family's orthodoxy. And even if this flying sword technique was not practiced to a high level, at least he would not fall behind others in the art of escape. He had really put in a lot of effort to plan for his disciple like this. The clone saw that Cui Xianping was looking at him eagerly and said, I will guide you here for 3 years. Once the 3 years are up, no matter how much you learn, I will send you down the mountain. Cui Xianping's expression turned solemn and he bowed, yes, I will try my best to learn. The clone stretched out his hand and pointed. Many figures appeared on the cave wall. It seemed like they were all controlling the flying sword. Below them, there were incantations and spiritual vigor. He said, take a look at these methods first. When you are familiar with them, let me know. I will catch a demon to fight with you and see how well you learn. Slay demons? Cui Xianping was not afraid after hearing it. Instead, he was excited and kowtowed again. He hurriedly ran to the stone wall and sat down. Suddenly, he exclaimed and said anxiously, Senior, my junior sister is still at the bottom of the mountain. The clone said, since she came to my island, I will give her some opportunities. You don't have to worry. Only then did Cui Xianping relax. Instead, he devoted all his attention to studying the cultivation method. Zhang Yan's clone was here teaching the flying sword technique. On the other hand, the original body sat in the hall for 10 consecutive days, deducing the high sky thunder again. However, the flaw was still not completely solved. Fortunately, there was a clue now, and he estimated that he would need a few more years to perfect it. He thought that the incident on the sea had happened for a long time. It was time to give Tao Xinren and the rest a reply. Thus, he flicked his finger and a rainbow flew out. He then summoned the true spirit and asked, "How is the abyss toad called, Yuzu?" The formation spirit found it funny and said, "With the nourishment from the spiritual opportunity in the Xuanzi Sea, Yuzu's vitality has recovered. However, he is very dishonest. He always pretends to be weak and half-dead because he is afraid that old master will call him to do something to die." Zhang Yan said indifferently, "That's not up to it. Find 2 inky flood dragons and send Yuzu to Tao Xinren. He doesn't have to worry about him. He is from the South Flower sect and naturally knows how to deal with this kind of mutant." The formation spirit said yes. Zhang Yan looked around and saw that there was still a round stone with the abyss toad hidden on the table. He thought that others couldn't use it, but it didn't mean that Tao Xinren couldn't use it. It was useless for him to keep it, so he might as well send it along. Thus, he said, "Bring this one too." The formation spirit went forward and put the round stone into his sleeve. Seeing that he had nothing else to say, he bowed and went to arrange this matter. In the small world of East Sea, Tao Xinren sensed the unusual movement of the realm gate. He looked around and saw a rainbow flying in and landing on the only altar here. He got up from his seat and after a few glances, he said to the boy standing beside him, "Xinren Zhang has replied. Go and invite the 2 Zenrens over." The boy bowed respectfully and said, "Yes, ancestral master." A moment later, 2 streams of clear qi flew over and landed at the same time. It was Li Xiumi and Mi Xiunan. After greeting the 2, Tao Xinren walked to the altar together. He stopped in front of one of the jade discs and swept it with his horsetail whisk. Light floated on it, and after a few breaths of time, Zhang Yan's figure appeared. This time, his magic power was very stable, and the jade discs did not tremble at all. When the 3 saw him, they all bowed and said, "Greetings, Xinren Zhang." Zhang Yan returned the greeting and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoists. I'm here today for the unfinished discussion last time." Tao Xinren said, "Has Xinren Zhang found the method to break the formation?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "I went to North Sea a few days ago and found 2 abyss toads. One of them doesn't have much vitality left, but fortunately, there's still one that can be used. If it's used properly, it can help the 3 of you to break the formation in South Sea." Tao Xinren also showed a hint of surprise and said, "Abyss toad. I didn't expect such a species to still exist in this world. Not bad, this demon is indeed a powerful weapon to break formations." Zhang Yan said, "I've already ordered people to send this demon to East Sea. Next, we can act according to the plan we discussed last time. As for how to do it, I won't ask too much." At this point, he looked at the 3 and said, "May I know what else the 3 of you need?" Tao Xinren thought for a moment and said, that Wu Ruyang is not like Zhou Ruying and the other 2. If they sense something is wrong, it's very likely that they will come out to fight me personally. This person has a real treasure and his cultivation is profound. Even if the 3 of us fight him together, we may not be able to defeat him. We can only think of another way. I know that Xinren Zhang is good at making talismans. Among them, sword talismans are very powerful. I wonder if you can give us a few." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This is easy. Apart from that, is there anything else that we lack?" Li Xiumi said, "This time, we have to set up 2 matrix discs. The treasured materials and spiritual medicine are many times more than before. Moreover, Yu Shao might destroy the setup. From the looks of it, the storage might not be enough." Although setting up a big formation in the east of South Cliff's continent was a fake attack, if it was not real enough, it would be difficult to deceive Yu Xiao. So, it was used as a real formation board. However, this time, Yu Xiao was on guard. Things might not be as smooth as the last time. It was not impossible to be forced to give up halfway. Although this might not happen, he thought that it was better to plan first so that he would not have to think of a solution when it came to the critical moment. Zhang Yan nodded and said, I will inform the sect. As long as we can restrain Yu Xiao, not to mention 2 formation boards, 10 or even 100 would be worth it. He came down and said a few more words to the 3 of them. Seeing that there was no need for him to deal with it, he left. After the 3 of them sent him off, Li Xiaomi turned around and said curiously, Tao Jinren, just now, from what you and Jinren Zhang have said, that Yuan Chan seems to be very powerful. I wonder what kind of power it has. How could it break the big formation on the Fengling Ocean? Mi Jinren had never heard of this thing before. He also had the same question and looked over. Tao Jinren smiled and explained, this Yuan Chan is a natural mutated species. It has the ability to transform into 100,000 feet and swallow continents. I heard that in ancient times, it once wreaked havoc, so the cultivators of the world set up a prohibition outside the continents. But even so, it still could not stop it. In order to prevent it from destroying the spiritual opportunity of the earth, many of them were slaughtered. The remaining ones escaped to an inaccessible place to hide and no longer show themselves. It was said that it was already extinct. I didn't expect Jinren Zhang to find it again this time. Li Xiaomi said in relief, no wonder. Even the ancient formation could not stop it. It's not difficult to break the big formation of Wu Ruyang. Tao Jinren shook his head and said, the spiritual opportunity now is very different from the ancient times. We don't know how much of this monster's ability can be used. We still have to be careful. Li Xiaomi said, fellow Daoist is right. Tao Jinren said again, since we have this killer move, I'll have to trouble fellow Daoist Li to follow the previous plan and go to the East Sea first. Li Xiaomi thought that it would probably take a few years to recover her mana. But with the elixir jade in hand, she could still recuperate while traveling outside. So she agreed and said, all right, I'll leave now. Tao Jinren reminded solemnly, Jinren Li, if you travel alone, you must be careful of that Wu Ruyang. Although he is in the Fengling Ocean, he might come out to kill you. If fellow Daoist feels that something is wrong, it's better to retreat as soon as possible. Chapter 1105. A few days later, Li Xiaomi arrived at the eastern sea of the South Cliffs continent. This place was still part of the East Sea, but because it was sandwiched between the South Cliffs continent and the Donghua continent, the cultivation sects near the sea gave it the nickname of Leaky Sea. He stayed here for half a day, but did not summon the water tribe to set up a formation. Instead, he concealed his qi and continued to head south. Another month later, he arrived at the Fengling Ocean. Afraid that Wu Ruyang would notice, he avoided the formation and hid in a place where it was hard for Wu Ruyang to detect him. The last time he drove the demons under the sea and connected the spiritual opportunity of the earth veins. Under the eyes of Zhou Ruiying and Wu Yunbi, he set up a huge formation silently. It could be said that Jade Cloud's sect suffered a great loss. Having been negligent once, he guessed that the other party must have a countermeasure this time and wouldn't allow him to do as he pleased. Therefore, he wanted to see exactly what method the other party was going to use. If he could solve it, he wouldn't mind doing the same thing again. He sank to the bottom of the sea to investigate carefully. This investigation took 2 months. But what was strange was that he did not find anything wrong in the surrounding sea. If Yu Xiao did not set up anything, he would not believe it. It was just that the method was so ingenious that he could not see through it. He could not help but fall into deep thought. The most efficient way now was to first set up a formation board. Then, no matter what Yu Xiao set up, they would not just sit and wait. They would definitely come to their door. Then, he could see the method they used. But there was a flaw in this. Once the formation board was set up, it would undoubtedly tell the other party that they had returned to the South Sea. This would likely make the other party more vigilant, and the inspection would be stricter than before. He calculated that this matter should not be decided by himself. He needed to discuss it with Tao and me. So he retreated far away and found an uninhabited island. He flicked his sleeves and threw out 2 square jade plates with bronze legs. He took out the spiritual incense. He scattered it and sprinkled it on the 2 plates. He raised his finger and it burned. Not long after, the figures of Tao Xinren and Mi Xinren appeared one after another. Li Xiaomi greeted the 2 of them. He told them about the situation and his concerns. Tao Xinren thought for a long time and said, "Fellow Taoist, you're better than us when it comes to traveling under the sea. Even you can't figure out Yu Xiao's method in 2 months. If it's the 2 of us, I think the result will be the same. If this goes on, I'm afraid that no matter how long we spend, it will be difficult to see any results. Fellow Taoist Li, you can set up a formation and give it a try." Mi Xinren frowned. "What if we can't find out what Yu Xiao is up to?" Tao Xinren nodded and admitted, "That's not impossible. However, the Qinsang school has asked for a lot of precious materials this time. If we can't do it the second time, we'll try it the third time. We'll definitely be able to find the reason. It's better than sitting around and waiting." Li Xiaomi muttered, "That's fine too." As long as he could find Yu Xiao's arrangement and find a way to break it, the vast sea would still be his. Furthermore, Zhang Yan had once said that as long as he could restrain this sect, he would not hesitate to kill them. No matter how many precious materials he used, it would be worth it. Tao Xinren said, "Fellow Taoist, you can set up a formation in the South Sea first. If something happens, you can go to the Leakage Sea. Maybe Yu Xiao will think that we've really given up on that place." Li Xiaomi said, "Then let's do it." After discussing with the 2 of them, he kept the 2 jade annulus and began to summon the marine creatures from all directions. Previously, many of the marine creatures he summoned were conferred titles by him. Most of them were demons who ruled over a region. When he shouted, they immediately responded and hurried over to pay their respects. About 10 days later, tens of thousands of marine creatures gathered around him. Most of them were used by him before. Especially the few Yao cultivators who took human form, they were conferred titles by him. Because he had set up a formation before, they all knew what to do this time. Li Xiaomi suddenly felt that he might have neglected this function before. These marine creatures might be more useful than he imagined. If he could nurture them well, the speed of setting up the formation base might be greatly increased. After thinking about it, he made up his mind. If Yu Xiao school came looking for him, even if he had to throw away this formation plate, he would try his best to protect the lives of these Yao cultivators. Just as he was summoning the marine creatures, he did not notice that among the demons, there were snow-white little fish that looked like they were made of ice crystals swimming around. They were only as thick as a strand of hair, and their bodies were no more than half an inch long. They were extremely agile and swam over a large area. Many of them floated up from the deep sea. This fish appeared to be full of spirituality, but in reality, it was not a living creature. Instead, it was a magical tool that the Jade Firmament sect specially requested the cultivators of the Heaven Mending Pavilion to refine in order to prevent outsiders from constructing a great formation in the sea region. This item could not be used to attack enemies. Its only use was to patrol the sea and observe the changes in spiritual opportunity. The precious materials used were also very common. Even a mystic light realm disciple from Butian Pavilion could make it. Therefore, in the past few decades, Butian Pavilion made hundreds of thousands of them, and all of them were thrown into the sea outside of South Cliff Continent. Because they were very small, sometimes they could even attach to the bodies of various marine creatures. Now, they were everywhere. Once there was a change in spiritual opportunity, they could be immediately attracted. In the Fengling Ocean, Wu Riyang sat cross-legged on the altar. In order to not use up his vitality, he usually sat quietly and did not even speak a word. Since the South Sea was peaceful, he had been guarding this place for more than 40 years. Compared to when he just came out of the door, his hair and beard were all white. His cheeks were sunken, his flesh was loose, and his eyes were cloudy. He looked old and frail. Last time, when he attacked the formation plate, he used up a lot of his vitality. In addition, he did not have much lifespan left. His body was slowly deteriorating. Even his spiritual energy was greatly reduced compared to a few decades ago. Usually, he relied on taking medicinal pills to maintain himself. About 10 feet in front of him, there was a small pond. The water was clear, and there was a thin silver shuttle floating on top of it. At this moment, the water in the pond suddenly stirred. It looked like it was boiling. The silver shuttle also spun and pointed towards the southeast direction. It made a buzzing sound. When Wu Riyang heard the sound, he looked up. However, his expression was very calm. When the silver fish outside encountered an inexplicable spiritual opportunity, the pond water would have such a strange phenomenon. In the beginning, he used his magical weapon to check it out. However, he realized that it was just some monsters under the water. It was obviously not worth his effort. Hence, in the end, he sent his disciples to check it out. After so many years, he was used to it. However, it was different this time. After an entire hour, the movement in the water still did not stop. Moreover, countless water bubbles gathered together and slowly piled up. More than half of the silver shuttle's body was also dyed with a layer of charred black color, and the sound had already become extremely loud. Wu Riyang's expression became serious. It was obvious that the spiritual opportunity was changing violently, and it attracted many silver fish to gather together. He could not help but pay attention to it. After thinking for a while, he took out a silver ring from his sleeve and threw it out. It turned into a ray of spiritual light and flew towards the sea. After flying for about 2 hours, it suddenly stopped at a part of the sea. Then, it moved horizontally. In an instant, it spread out for thousands of miles. It seemed like it wanted to include the entire place in the ring. In the deep sea below, Li Xiaomi was sitting steadily. His expression looked relaxed, but he was constantly sensing the movements around him. As the number of thin-sleeved silver fishes increased, he finally sensed that something was wrong. Immediately, he stretched out his hand and grabbed one. With a gentle squeeze, it turned into a pile of silver mud. His eyes lit up. He said, "So it's because of this." At this moment, he suddenly felt something. He stood up and looked up. When he saw the scene in the sky, he exclaimed, "Wu Doran's Qi-gazing ring." When he was on the South Sea. With the help of the formation, he fought with Wu Riyang a few times. He knew that Wu Riyang had 3 rings, which were the Falling Ring, Qi-gazing ring, and Space-crossing ring. Wherever the Qi observation circle went, it could observe everything in its surroundings, while the low-fall circle could determine spiritual opportunity. As for the space-crossing ring, it was even more impressive. Within tens of thousands of miles, the owner of the ring could use it to teleport back and forth. If it wasn't for the help of the Dragon Palace, the 3 of them would not have been able to escape. He knew that even if he hid his qi, Wu Riyang could still find him with the various secret treasures of the Yuxiao school. If he did not leave now and Wu Riyang chased after him, he might lose his life here. Luckily, he knew that Yuxiao was using the silver fish to scout for qi. Since he had achieved his goal, there was no need for him to stay here any longer. He immediately let out a dragon roar and dismissed all the monster cultivators. Then, he turned into a ray of light and headed south from the bottom of the sea. Wu Riyang borrowed the Qi-gazing ring and saw countless spiritual lights coming and going in the sea. He immediately knew that something was wrong. He took out another silver ring from his sleeve and threw it forward. In an instant, it turned into a man's height. He stood up and stepped inside with his hands behind his back. When he came out, he took the ring and did the same thing. After a few rounds, he finally arrived at the place where Li Xiaomi was just now. He made a hand sign and activated the Qi-gazing ring to look around. However, after some effort, he could not find Li Xiaomi. It was obvious that Li Xiaomi had escaped long ago. It was impossible to find him. He thought to himself, there is movement in the South Sea again. I think Tao, Li, and the rest are coming again. I thought they should still be recovering their chi and mana. I didn't expect them to come so quickly. But it's good that they came earlier. After a few decades, I might not have enough mana to suppress the three of them. After taking another look, he waved his sleeves and kept the two treasured rings. Then, he flew into the sky and left. However, not long after he left, a devil leaped out from the void and stared at the escaping light. At the same time, Sima Quan stood on top of the cauldron. His eyes flickered. At this moment, his upper body could be vaguely seen, but his lower body was blurry and seemed to be mixed with the mist. He had already recovered half of his chi, but it would take at least 40 to 50 years for him to completely recover his heavenly devil body. However, after his battle with Zhang Yan, almost all of his enchanted treasures were destroyed. Even then, his strength would not be even half of what it was. However, this was not something that could not be changed. If he could capture the spirit of another Taoist paradise, just like what he did in the Dongxing continent, he could at least refine another enchanted treasure like Swadalians. Decades ago, he had sent disciples to the Dongxing continent, but found that the other two Taoist paradise masters had long disappeared. No one knew where they were hiding, so he had no choice but to set his sights on the South Sea to see if he could take advantage of the situation. Originally, he had set his sights on Tao, Li, and me. Because they were not disciples of the Qinsang school, even if he succeeded, few people would pursue it. Moreover, most people would think that it was Yu Shao who did it, so he could remove himself to the greatest extent. However, he realized that Wu Ruyang seemed to be a suitable target. He thought, Wu Ruyang's life force is clearly insufficient, and his mana is gradually declining. However, it is convenient for my spirit to invade. It seems that this person will fight with Tao Zhenhong and the others sooner or later. If they really fight, then it will be my chance. In that case, I can think of a way to help the three of them. He raised his hand and took out a large urn. With a grab, countless devils flew out from the cauldron and fell into the urn. Finally, he raised his hand and pressed down, sealing the urn. He called silently in his heart. Not long after, disciple Hui Shao entered and said, "Teacher, do you have any instructions?" Sima Quan threw the urn at her feet and said, "Take this to the South Sea and just throw it there. You don't have to worry about the rest." Hui Shao picked up the urn and said, "Disciple will do it right away." "Teacher, do you have any other instructions?" Sima Quan said, "Has it been peaceful outside the virtual sky recently?" Hui Shao said, "Ever since Master started his strategy, all of them have been seeking Tao with peace of mind. In these few years, Disciple has consecutively sent over 100 people up. As for those two junior apprentice brothers, after Master has recovered his mana, my Dark Yin Celestial Palace will be even more powerful than before." Sima Quan was very satisfied and said, "You've done very well." Hui Shao was flattered and said, "Teacher, you praise me too much." Sima Quan pointed, and a black aura entered the space between her brows. He said, "I will bestow another divine art to you. Remember, the South Sea matter is especially important. It concerns my future plans, and no mistakes must be made." Hui Shao said sternly, "Disciple understands." Palace of Purity Truth, Xuanzi Ocean Realm. Zhang Yan was sitting and watching, but suddenly, his mind throbbed. He looked inside and found that the 9 subduing demons slip had changed. Ever since the battle outside the sky, after this item absorbed the heavenly demon essence chi, it had been wrapped in a cloud of smoke. But now, it had completely dissipated. He only touched it with his mind, and waves of feeling surged into his mind. He instantly understood the various changes. With a thought, a ray of light flew out from the space between his brows. A long jade slip floated before him, and its appearance had changed slightly when compared to before. It didn't seem like a bamboo slip, and it seemed more like a jade tablet instead. It was completely crystalline and smooth while radiance flowed on it, and fine lines of blood could be faintly seen within it. It was actually extraordinarily gorgeous. In the past, This item could only be kept after he killed his opponent, and then stored in his consciousness orifice to defend against soul attacks from the outside. However, he could never use it to hurt his enemy. After refining it on his own, he could use it like a talisman. As for its power, he couldn't be sure until he met his opponent. He thought to himself, I've already returned Jinren Mu's talisman to him, and I've also opened the restrictions in the Grotto Heaven. I might be able to find an answer when I fight him next time. Chapter 1106. Inside the upper extreme hall, Qi Yuntian was reading a memorial letter. According to the letter, a few days ago, more than 10 junior disciples entered the Little Devil's Cave to cultivate, but on the way, they encountered tens of thousands of devil insects, and were unable to escape in time, so all of them perished. There were also many people who were implicated, and all of them were infected with devil poison, and their injuries were not light. Ever since Sima Quan returned to the 9 continents from outside the void sky, he had released these devil insects. The Yutsang sect had also sent cultivators down to exterminate them. Then, the devil was dispersed by Zhang Yan in outer space, and these devil insects also disappeared, rarely seen again. However, in the past few months, these insects showed signs of coming back. Although they were not as strong as before, they were not something that the junior disciples could deal with. When this matter came out, some people in the sect thought that the small demon cave was left untouched because they thought that if it became the real demon cave, they could suppress it. Not only would they not need to mobilize a large force, they could even easily obtain the Yuan Furnace Pill Jade. However, the current situation was different. Since the Profound and Demon families had stopped fighting, it was very likely that they would be implicated if they stayed here. Moreover, the 16 demon insects were practically impossible to kill. Thus, they suggested that it was better to completely seal this place. However, there were also people who thought that this was a rare spiritual land. The existing demon poison was not important, they could let the disciples clean it up and gain experience. Moreover, the northern Darkstar continent had already conquered half of the continent and established the 10 great demon kingdoms. Other than killing wild demons, the disciples in the sect had no other merit to gain. This place was a good place to gain merit. These two parties had their own opinions, but both had their reasons. Although Qi Yuntian had some thoughts in his heart, the matters of the sect had been decided by the 3 halls over the years. He couldn't make a decision by himself. Thus, he said to the palace attendants, "Go and discuss something with the 2 hall masters." The attendant received the order and left. Not long after, Huxian arrived first. The attendant also returned and said, "Master Du Zhen is in seclusion, I'm afraid it will be difficult for him to come." Qi Yuntian said, "I know, you may leave." Since Zhang Yan could not come, then this matter could only be decided by him and Huxian. He handed the memorial to Huxian. "Junior brother, take it and have a look." Huxian took it, opened it, and read it, but did not say anything. Qi Yuntian asked, "What does Junior Hu think about the Little Devil Cave?" Huxian said in a deep voice, "About suppression. Logically speaking, he should be able to solve the problem once and for all and get rid of any future troubles. However, the Shouming Palace was located above the Little Devil's Cave, and the disciples of the Shouming Palace had benefited a lot from it. Immortal Peng had not said anything about this. It's obvious that he doesn't approve of this action. If that's the case, it would be inappropriate. Now that the 3rd High Prince could decide almost everything in the sect, if the 2 of them insisted on suppressing the Devil's Cave, even if Immortal Peng was dissatisfied, he had no choice but to obediently accept the order. However, things were not that simple. Among those disciples who died, one of them was a disciple of Daoist Master Zhu. If it caused the master and disciple families to clash again, it would be detrimental to their future actions. Qi Yuntian said in a low voice, "I've thought about it before. We might as well send a few people to the depths of the Little Devil's Cave to check on the changes in the spiritual opportunity. If there's really a possibility that it could turn into a real Devil's Cave, then we have to destroy it no matter what. If not, there's no need to go all out." Huxian agreed, "Senior brother's idea is the most appropriate, but who should we send?" Qi Yuntian said, now that the top 10 disciples' cultivation is insufficient, it's difficult to detect the actual situation in the Devil's Cave. We can send an inner hall elder from each hall of Dikong and Duzhen Hall to do the same. Hu Xian nodded, that's fine. Since junior brother Zhang is in seclusion, junior brother Ning is the side hall master. We might as well inform him. However, he's cultivating in the Changguan cave. I wonder if he's like junior brother Zhang and doesn't care about the outside world. Although Ning Chongxian was the side hall master, he only came to the third high prince hall occasionally. Most of the time, he cultivated in the Sun Jinren cave. Firstly, there was no lack of spiritual opportunity here. Secondly, he had not reached the last step of cultivation, so there was no need to go to the floating heavenly palace. Qi Yuntian thought for a moment and said, let me write a letter to ask him. If it's true, then we can only use the sect master's token. Even the upper extreme hall couldn't order the elders of the Duzhen and Tiankong halls around as they pleased, unless it was the order of the sect master. However, he had the token given by the sect master. When the hall master and vice hall master of the two halls weren't around, he could use it directly. A day later, the elder of the Duzhen Hall, Luo Qingyu, and the Dikong Hall, Duda, were ordered to go to the small devil's cave to investigate. Both of them had cultivated the Yuanying Dharmakaya, so there were no demons in the small devil's cave that could harm them. They went there to investigate, and it took them 3 months to come out just now. Then, they reported to the floating heavenly palace. Both of them said that the spiritual opportunity of this place had changed very little, and there was no possibility of it turning into the real devil's cave for at least 400 to 500 years. When Qi Yuntian heard the report, he immediately made a decision. He immediately ordered the elders of the Purple Light Hall to send a message to the Merit Hall. The disciples of the Qinsang school only needed to kill the demon insects and demons in the small devil's cave, and they would be rewarded. When the order was given, everyone in the sect was excited. The small devil's cave was full of spiritual opportunity, and it was not inferior to the Cave of Bliss. However, because it was blocked by the tide, it could only be used at the beginning of every month. Now, the sect specially sent a few elders of the Purple Light Hall to guard the Eye of the Sea to help people pass through, so it was much more convenient to go in and out. Although this caused some dissatisfaction among the disciples of the guarding heavenly palace, they did not directly suppress and destroy the place, which at least saved some face for immortal Peng. This continued for 6 years, and the situation inside the Devil's Cave changed greatly. Most of the demons in the Devil's Cave retreated to the depths, and rarely appeared in groups. On this day, a flying boat descended from the sky outside the guarding heavenly palace, and more than 20 cultivators came down from it. The one in front was a woman in red with silver earrings on her ears. Her waist was slender and soft, and when she walked, she was graceful and light like a swallow. She glanced behind her with her beautiful eyes and said, when you reach the Devil's Cave, you must listen to me, your senior sister, and do not wander around. If the devil Qi invades your spirit, don't blame me for not warning you. The disciples behind her had obviously experienced the power of this senior sister, and they all obeyed her, and no one dared to disagree. These people were all cultivators of the Love Return Island. Since the island owner, Huang Fuzhou, had cultivated the Yuanying Dharmakaya more than 10 years ago, their status had also risen. Even some disciples of the Cave Immortals were very polite when they saw them. After the woman in red gave her instructions, she led the more than 20 people into the flying crane building where the CI was. She walked to the Yuanying elder who was in charge there and handed him a token talisman. The elder took a look and said, so you're from the Love Return Island. Please wait for a moment. When there are 100 people, Daoren can open the CI. The woman in red looked around and saw that there were still half of them left. However, she was also straightforward and said, I'll wait then. After waiting for a while, a cloud raft came from outside, and there were more than 10 male and female cultivators standing on it. The leader was dressed in a Taoist robe, and he had a square face and an awe-inspiring aura. When they arrived in front of the flying crane building, everyone came down. They walked inside, and the cultivators there who knew what to do made way, not daring to fight. The Yuanying elder, who had been sitting on the futon, stood up when he saw these people coming. He bowed and said, "So it's Perfected D. Greetings." Perfected D returned the greeting and took out a token talisman with both hands. He said, "Elder Wang, I and my fellow sect members have led the matter of setting up the Essence Abode Tower in the Demon Cave. I hope you can make an exception." Elder Wang smiled and said, "What are you talking about? This matter is very beneficial to our sect's disciples, so I'll open the path for you." As he said that, his expression turned solemn and he silently chanted a few incantations. He then swung his horsetail whisk, and the seawater under the well rumbled. Then, a water channel was slowly opened. The Love Return Island disciples were very curious, and one of them asked softly, "Senior sister, why don't they have to wait? Do you know who they are?" The woman in red pouted and said, "The leader is called Di Hui. He's a disciple of the Zhaoyu sect and a disciple of the Xianyuan Grotto Heaven. This perfected deity Grotto Heaven is the hall master of the Duzhen Hall. This Daoran can't even fawn on him, so how would he dare to offend him?" The disciple came to a realization, and his face showed respect. He said, "So he's a disciple of perfected deity Grotto Heaven. No wonder." At this moment, the sea channel was completely opened. Elder Wang's face was slightly pale, and he said while panting, "Everyone, you can enter now." Perfected deity D bowed and thanked him. He turned around and called out to the others, and a group of more than 10 people jumped down. Elder Wang waved at the disciples in the building and said, "You don't have to wait anymore. Doran's magic power is limited, and he can only open the eye of the sea for the time it takes for an incense stick to burn. After that, he will need a few more hours to recuperate. The replacement hasn't arrived yet, so I'm afraid he won't be able to open the door before nightfall. You should also enter quickly, don't miss it." When the rest heard that, they didn't dare to delay any longer. They hurriedly used their escape techniques and entered. In less than 10 breaths, the place became empty, and there was no trace of anyone. At this moment, under the eye of the sea, Di Hui and the others had safely arrived at the small demon cave. He looked around, and there was nothing strange, so he took out a flying boat and leaped up. He said, "Come up." More than 10 disciples behind him responded and got on the boat. He activated the talisman, and the boat turned into a rainbow, flying straight into the depths of the demon cave. After traveling for more than 10 days, the number of pearls on the surrounding stone walls had gradually decreased. Obviously, there were not many cultivators who came here. After traveling for another 4 days, Di Hui saw that there was no more light around, so he stopped the flying boat and said, "Set it up here." The disciples behind him responded in unison. He was the first to jump down, and with a flick of his sleeve, he took out a 30 feet high abode. Then he sat inside and lit a tall incense in front of him. He said, "I'll guard against demons here. Disciples, quickly set up the formation flags outside. There's no time to waste." In order to make it easier for the disciples to walk in the small demon cave, the 9th courtyard ordered that a hut be set up every 100 miles, and a tower be set up every 1,000 miles. If the disciples felt tired, they could come here to adjust their breath and restore their magic power. They could also use the restriction here to keep the demons and insects away. Relying on this arrangement, the disciples of the Qinsang school had gradually pushed their tentacles into the depths of the small demon cave. However, when they reached here, the cultivation of the demons was extremely high, and they had already developed spiritual intelligence, which was enough to compete with the ordinary Yuanian cultivators. They also knew that if the Qinsang school pushed in like this, it would be difficult for them to deal with it, so they would take the opportunity to attack the tower. Just now, this tower of Qinsang school would be destroyed not long after. Therefore, there was a saying in the merit courtyard that if a disciple could set up a formation flag in an unknown place and hold on until the arrival of the sect's elders, they would be given a great merit. Although Di Hui could be considered as a direct disciple of the Xianyuan sect, after his master Sun Qing accepted him into the sect, other than giving him pointers, he did not ask about anything else. Moreover, he did not like to owe people from the same sect, so the magic tools and treasures that he used were always exchanged with his own merit. This time, in order to forge a profound level weapon, he was still lacking several precious materials, so he took the initiative to undertake this task. After about 6 hours, seeing that the formation outside was about to be completed, a disciple suddenly shouted, threw the formation flag in his hand, and flew up into the sky, as if he was about to fly away. Di Hui was expressionless. A yellow smoke flew up from the top of his head, and suddenly turned into a big hand, grabbing the disciple, pulling him back and throwing him at his feet. He pointed a finger at the disciple's eyebrows, and the disciple's body trembled, and wisps of black smoke came out from his ears and nose. The disciple opened his eyes blankly, and when he saw the situation around him clearly, he turned over and stood up, and said with his mouth wide open, "Master, this disciple," Di Hui said in a deep voice, "you have been poisoned by the devil, and I have already removed it for you. You are already fine." The disciple gasped, and said in shock, "How can this be? Didn't I take the demon-suppressing pill?" Di Hui said, "The pill can only last for a while, otherwise, why would you ask us to come here? Don't ask too many questions, hurry up and get to work." The disciple hurriedly bowed his head and accepted the order, and returned to his original position. Di Hui looked into the depths of the cave, and his expression gradually became solemn. He could feel that at this moment, there were at least 3 demons with profound cultivation hiding in the dark, and in another hour, the formation would be completed, and by then, they would definitely rush up. This would definitely be a fierce battle, and if he could survive, then he would be able to obtain a great merit, but if he could not, although he was confident that he could protect the disciple and retreat, he could only abandon the formation flag refined house that he had prepared in advance. After another half a minute, when there were still a few corners of the formation that were ready to seal the formation, he suddenly heard an ear-piercing scream, and black smoke rolled in from all directions, as if there were millions of ghosts crying in it. His gaze sharpened, and he stood up. At the same time, the 2 high clouds above his head shook, and countless yellow lights flew out from his back, and shot in all directions. Under the ceiling formation of the small cold world, Mu Shoshan sat in the hut, and there were 2 white smoke coming out from his mouth and nose. Inside the smoke were 2 pills, gold and red in color. As he inhaled and exhaled spiritual vigor, the pills kept rolling on top of his chi, sometimes small and sometimes big. After a long while, he gently inhaled and kept it into his stomach. After sitting for a while, he took out a flying feather from his sleeve and caressed it. He couldn't help but sigh. With his cultivation, if he hadn't been trapped for more than 800 years, he was confident that he could nurture a true weapon. However, at the moment, the only treasures that could be considered powerful were the true treasures that Qin Qingang had bestowed upon him after he formed the heavenly abode. After this treasure was taken back by the mountain gate, it was not willing to work for the people of the other grotto heaven, so it was placed in the Hall of Ancestors, and no one used it. This time, after Zhang Yan pleaded for it, it was returned to him a few years ago. However, he also knew that it was impossible for him to contend against Zhang Yan, who possessed a murderous sword. Fortunately, there were many precious materials hidden in the heavenly abode in the past, and he had refined many magic tools in the past few years. He believed that with the help of the pool of creation, he would be able to contend against Zhang Yan. At this moment, a ray of light flashed past the hut, and he unconsciously lifted his head. He heard a clear voice from outside, "It's been 6 years, I wonder if Jinren Mu is ready." Mu Shoshan smiled, and his eyes were filled with fighting spirit. He stood up and said, "Hall Master Du Zhen, you're late, I've been waiting here for a long time." Chapter 1107. The moment Mu Shoshan said that, there was a moment of silence outside. After 100 minutes, there was a loud rumble and the sky suddenly lit up. He couldn't help but be surprised and walked out of the pagoda. He looked over and saw that the sky above the small world seemed to have been torn open. Rays of sword light flew in from outside. There were tens of thousands of them and they shone brightly. They seemed to have formed a vast starry river that shone brightly within thousands of miles. Just now, it was just a sword intent that came to ask questions. Zhang Yan's real body was still far away in the floating heavenly palace's Duzhen Hall. After a while, all the lights retracted and a black-robed Taoist walked over and bowed. "Thank you for waiting, perfected Mu." Mu Shoshan looked at the person with a burning gaze and said, Hall Master Du Zhen, the sword technique that you practice, is it the Shaoqing sword transformation? Zhang Yan smiled and nodded, because I have some experience in the flying sword technique, I received permission from the sect master to go to Shaoqing to learn the sword. Under the guidance of the Shaoqing mountain sect master, I have indeed benefited a lot. Mu Shoshan said thoughtfully, so there's such an inside story. When Zhang Yan displayed the killing true sword, he guessed that he might have obtained the legacy of a certain Taoist grotto heaven from Shaoqing sect. However, he didn't expect that the truth was that he had obtained the Shaoqing true sword technique. He concluded that because Zhang Yan's cultivation technique was different, he was unable to cultivate the various transformations of the Shaoqing sword technique. However, in terms of attainments in using the flying sword, other than the Taoist grotto heaven from Shaoqing sect, no one in the same generation could compare to him. If that was the case, it would actually be easy to deal with him. The key was that other than the flying sword, Zhang Yan also had deep mana. Even if he were to face an enemy head-on, he wouldn't be afraid of anyone in the same generation. He had already realized it. This was the first opponent that he had seen in his life. He couldn't help but think of He Jingchen and Zhui Yuming. He sighed, Hall Master Du Zhen, every generation is filled with outstanding talents. Let me experience the ability of this generation's Hall Master. Zhang Yan looked around and said, this is the place where the enlightened being cultivates. Why don't we change to another place? When Mu Shoshan heard this, he looked at him deeply and said, okay, Hall Master Du Zhen, please come with me. At that moment, a clear light appeared. Flying into the distance, Zhang Yan's figure flashed, and he became one with the sword light, turning into a rainbow as well. After traveling for several hours, the two of them arrived at a desert. Aside from the boundless land, there were no mountains or ridges in the surrounding tens of thousands of kilometers. It was as if the two of them were the only ones left in the world. Mu Shoshan asked, how about this place? Zhang Yan looked around and said, this is indeed a good place to fight. Mu Shoshan said, go ahead, Hall Master Du Zhen. Since he was defeated by you, I'll be the first to experience his brilliance. Zhang Yan nodded and apologized. He stood on the spot and didn't move. With a command of his spiritual intent, a sword light pierced through the air and slashed over. Since he said that he would go all out with his opponent, then with the killing true sword in hand, he naturally had to fully utilize his advantage. However, this person's temperament was completely different from the previous one. They should be viewed as two different people, since they didn't understand each other. Then, he could only test the waters first. Mu Shoshan looked at the sword light coming over, but he didn't dodge. He took out a handful of sand and scattered it outwards. A beautiful glow floated around his body. The sword light instantly flew over and slashed above him. However, it was as if it had hit metal, giving off a grinding sound. It was extremely ear-piercing. The sand continued to spin, and after using up half of it, it forcefully blocked the sword light. Seeing this, Zhang Yan wasn't in a rush to attack. Instead, he asked with interest, enlightened being Mu. I wonder what this is. Mu Shoshan didn't hide anything and told him directly, this item is called, dust-twisting sand. Before my master conquered North Underworld, he gathered hundreds of astral heroes from beyond the heavens and refined them with 12 special medicines. He was prepared to use it against Shaoqing sect's killing true sword. However, he didn't use it, so he gave it to his disciples. I got some of it then. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed, oh, did the sect have any intention of going against Shaoqing? Mu Shoshan shook his head, although we didn't, we had to be prepared. When he joined the sect, the Yinsang sect was at its peak. Its prestige was great and it was like the sun in the sky. In the whole world, only the Jade Cloud sect and Shaoqing sect of the same generation could be a match for it. At that time, almost all the enlightened masters in the sect had thought about how they should deal with the cultivators of these two sections. On the other hand, the Shaoqing true sword of slaughter was extremely sharp, so it was especially valued. Thus, many people in the Dark Azure sect had created many formidable methods to deal with it, and this dust grinder was only one of them. Zhang Yan nodded in agreement, that's right. Before the Yutsang sect attacked the North Underworld, they had almost come out in full force. At that time, their relationship with Shaoqing was only normal. Even though this sect would not attack people for no reason, there was always the slightest chance. It was never too much to be prepared. Mu Shoshan said, after my master created this dust-twisting sand, he didn't have a suitable opponent, so he didn't test it. However, Mu Shoshan looked at him, this time, I can fulfill my master's wish on behalf of my master. Ever since the establishment of the Shaoqing and Xuanzang sects, they had never truly fought each other. In order to avoid damaging their vitality, it was even more impossible for the people of the Heaven's Abode to take the initiative to challenge each other. Yan Changshen was good friends with an elder of the Shaoqing sect, but no one knew if they had sparred. At the very least, they had never mentioned it to their fellow disciples. Zhang Yan said happily, I'm very willing to try your methods. He was very happy to see the various methods that could restrain the murderous swords. This was also quite beneficial to him. In the future, if he were to encounter a similar method during the Great Calamity, he would be able to have a good idea of what was going on. At the very least, he wouldn't be unable to counter it. He waved his hand forward. This time, it wasn't a single sword light, but hundreds of sword lights. Mu Shoshan waved his sleeves and sent out a large cloud of flying sand. Under the control of his dermic powers, the sand circled 1,000 feet around him. The sword lights that came were all wrapped up by the sand. However, the number of sword lights was decreasing at a visible rate. Zhang Yan immediately determined that this could block the flying swords temporarily, but it was at the cost of using up a large amount of the treasure sand. Once it was used up, it would be difficult to block. However, he didn't believe that Mu Shoshan only had this method. If not, he wouldn't have stood in front of him. Thus, he flicked his finger and shot dozens of lightning lights. Mu Shoshan flicked his sleeve. Similarly, he shot dozens of lightning lights. When the two sides collided in mid-air, there was a series of explosions. At the same time, he quickly made a gesture, and a cloud of white smoke appeared on his body. It soared into the sky, and with just a turn, it absorbed all the sword lights. Then, it flew back again. Then, it flew back and disappeared, as if it had entered another world. This technique was created by Yi Sanshan, the previous Grotto Heaven Jinren. It was called smoke and cloud separation. Not only could it counter the flying swords, but it could also temporarily seal the magical treasures within the smoke, preventing them from being used by the sword owner. However, this technique required a rare spiritual medicine as a catalyst. He had some in his Grotto Heaven Jinren. He only took them out after he released the Grotto Heaven Jinren. Because there were very few of them. Even though he had an endless amount of spiritual power, he couldn't unleash it all. However, every technique had its strengths and weaknesses. Because Zhang Yan was using sword transformation, he didn't pursue killing power. That was why he was able to block it so easily. If the killing sword was here, it would be able to pierce through in the blink of an eye. Zhang Yan sensed that the connection between him and the sword lights had become faint. It was as if they were extremely far away from him. He couldn't help but be shocked. He thought about it again. He said, this feeling is like entering a small world. It's using the profundities of teleportation to temporarily trap them within. However, it can trap 100 of them, but it might not be able to trap 1,000 or 10,000 of them. Thus, he focused his divine will and controlled more flying swords to attack. At once, thousands of light beams shot out. Mu Shoshan frowned. Indeed, it was just as Zhang Yan had guessed. He could stop over 100 sword lights at this moment, but he was powerless against such a large number of sword lights. It wasn't that this technique was too weak. It was just that he wasn't familiar with it. He hadn't cultivated it to a high level. He reached out and pressed forward. The smoke pillar beside him slowly spread outwards. On the other hand, he tossed out a feather. With a light touch, he tossed it out. After the feather reached the sky, it quickly flew far away. Every time it flew a certain distance, it would split into a feather. In just a few breaths, there were hundreds of them and they flew outwards. Zhang Yan noticed it too. He casually sent out a few lightning arcs to test it. Unexpectedly, all of the lightning streaks passed through the feathers as if they were merely illusions. He pondered for a moment, but was unable to determine what they were. However, they were not a threat to him, so he decided to ignore them for now. The pillar of smoke outside Mount Musho finally reached its limit under the impact of the thousands of sword lights. With a loud bang, it collapsed into countless wisps of smoke. The sword lights inside were freed from their shackles and were carried by the rainbow lights outside. They all charged toward the figure in the middle. Mu Shoshan's expression didn't change. He took out an incense burner and held it with one hand. With a shake of his hand, he lifted the lid of the incense burner. He shook it gently and streaks of bright light flew out from the incense burner. They flew around and around, accompanied by a sharp whistle. In an instant, they covered a few miles around him. This was called the Profound Mystic Magnetic Dipper, and it could be attached to a flying sword, causing it to become heavy and difficult to control. If it wasn't expelled as soon as possible, it would lose its spirituality. He had wandered around the outside world for more than 10 years before going to the underground to collect it. Originally, he was prepared to have a method to defend himself in case he encountered a sword cultivator. However, he didn't have the chance to use it until he was captured. He didn't expect to take it out today. However, this item had yet to be tested. He wasn't sure if it would be able to defend against the true killing sword. Fortunately, he had set up an escape route just now. Even if he couldn't win, he could still escape. The sword light in the sky arrived in an instant. However, when it slashed into the magnetic field, there was a moment of delay. As it went deeper in, as more and more of the magnetic field touched the sword light, it also became heavier, as if it had entered a swamp. Zhang Yan looked down and found it somewhat familiar. He thought to himself, this is somewhat similar to the bipolar star magnet ray I've seen in the past. They might be of the same origin. However, it is enough to deal with ordinary flying swords. This sword of mine has already become profound, and it is impossible to block it. With a command of his divine will, all the sword lights suddenly trembled and turned, shaking away all the magnetic rays. It was as if there were thousands of fish leaping out of the water at the same time, stirring up countless waves and ripples. The magnetic rays also collapsed under the sword light's slashes. Mu Shoshan saw this and didn't show any disappointment. Instead, he became spirited and thought to himself, it looks like this magnetic shield can be a hindrance and isn't useless. Along with what I did before, I can hold off the flying sword for a while. It looks like I don't need to test it anymore. I can set up a formation and fight it. He put the incense burner into his sleeve. The magnetic shield had lost its source. After a few breaths, the sword lights were completely destroyed. Then, he turned around and attacked. At this moment, there was nothing in front of him that could be used as a hindrance. He raised his head and looked calmly at the sky full of sword lights. He allowed them to attack him, but he didn't dodge. In the blink of an eye, the first strand of sword light had already arrived in front of him, and it struck his body. However, right at this moment, he suddenly vanished from where he was, and all the sword lights that came after him struck empty air. At the same time, a feather in midair suddenly disappeared. Zhang Yan immediately sensed that something was amiss. He could not help but look over and saw Mu Shoshan step out from the void. He could not help but raise his eyebrows. With another thought, the sword light from afar leaped through the air and slashed over. Strangely, the scene this time was the same as the last time. When the sword light slashed his body, Mu Shoshan disappeared again. At the same time, another feather disappeared in midair. In the next moment, he appeared there and said, Hall Master Du Zhen, this is a treasure that my teacher gave me. It is called the Wanxiang feather. Ever since I got it, I have never used it in front of anyone. Even he hasn't used it. With this treasure, even if you have a weapon, you won't be able to hurt me. Zhang Yan smiled and said, if that is the case, Then just now, you don't have to try all the methods to restrain the flying sword. I think there are still flaws. Mu Shoshan openly admitted, Hall Master Du Zhen is right, but which Dharma treasure in the world can be perfect and flawless? Doesn't your flying sword have ways to restrain it? It can be seen that the strength of a treasure depends on how the person wielding it uses it. Zhang Yan smiled and said, if that is the case, I shall learn from you. Mu Shoshan's expression became serious and he said, that is how it should be. He took a step back, and then his body swayed. Suddenly, he heard a loud noise. A great inspiration appeared in front of him, and two magical images were suddenly released. One of them was a vermilion flame, red light and stars descended, like a blazing feather, scarlet flames surging. The other was a muddy sand dart that flew like hailstones. There was a white gas that connected its head and tail like a needle in the clouds. The two dermas split into two sides, one on the